Noting that it's 7:02 on December 1st, 2021, I'm going to suggest that we call the Board of Health meeting to order. We'll need to do that by a roll call vote. So, Daryl Beardsley, present. Aye.
Matt Beavers, present.
Lisa Camp, present.
Rebecca Honeywell, present.
Matt Vitale, present.
Okay, and now the next thing
you don't have the latest agenda up, Daryl.
Oh, okay.
All it is what was added.
Yeah. So let me, it'll take a moment. Bear with me.
So,
Let's see.
Daryl, do you want me to make the motion?
On what we're adding for the agenda?
Yep. Is it just the 74 Washington Street, Ellen?
Yes, that's all, unless anyone else has anything.
Oh, that's the only item?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. All right, then I will go back. Yes.
Yes, I'll be
So,
reviewing that, Daryl, at the right time.
Okay. All right. Do we have a motion to amend the agenda with the one item identified?
So moved.
Second. Do you need to do a roll
Okay.
call? Yep.
Yeah, sorry, I'm admitting people. Daryl, aye.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa Camp, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye.
All right. Sorry, just trying to get the agenda back up. Old as it may be. All right. We have an appeal hearing at 8 p.m. and a number of other items to address in between. And would you like to go first with the COVID, Matt? I just need to pull up the data that we wanted to look at.
Yeah, and unless any objections, I'd like to open with that.
Okay. Take me a moment.
And if it ends up easier, Daryl, I'm happy to share from this end as well. Just let me know.
Letting more people in. Okay. All right. Are you seeing that on the screen?
Not yet.
Do you see that on the screen?
I see something on the screen, but I don't know if it's the old one or the new one.
I think that's the agenda. What? Daryl,
Yeah.
I'll
All
just
right.
share from
Yes.
this end if that works. Do you guys see the current PowerPoint?
Hold on, not yet. Now we do. Yep.
Perfect. So I will just walk through this data, which includes both our local daily rate data for the combined communities of Dover and Sherborn, as well as some other associated data that's pertinent to the discussion. So this first slide is the average daily rate per 100,000 for the November 25th data, which is the most recent recent report out. We saw an uptick from 14.4 the preceding week to 19.2. That's up from our recent nadir of 1.6 on November 4th.
Hey, Matt, remind me, is it sort of like the threshold indicative of quote community spread 20? Is that
No, so substantial transmission is 7. So we're well above that one right now.
Okay.
For percent positivity, we're 2.2%, which is sort of within the general range we've been in, supports the idea that we continue to have pretty robust access to testing. The daily rate here is the it's a slightly different data set. So the preceding data is derived by comparing the case count between the current report and that report 2 weeks prior and treating differences in those counts as new cases. It's not a perfect methodology. I think it's a reasonable and transparent one, but the state has individual level data that is not accessible to us. And so this data set, sort of on this graph, includes the case rate from an actuarial estimate of population for the population of the communities and the true cases identified as individuals. And so the line in kind of orange here is Sherborn, the line is in gray is Dover, and the blue is the state average. So while we've seen an uptick locally, we still remain below the state average. It's not uncommon to have some differences between each community in the state report, just because one case can have a significant impact in terms of moving it up a couple of points, especially as we get to the individual community level like Sherborn, where it might be 4,000 or 5,000 people for the population. So this is data that is derived from the state dashboard, and it's just revisualized here. So this is the average daily case rate by age. And so for this, we've got less than 5 in blue, 5 to 9 in orange, 10 to 14 in gray, 15 to 19 in yellow. And then we go into 10-year deciles, so 20, 29, 30, 39, 40, 49, and so on. And so I think what's interesting about this data is we see a sort of significant and disproportionate trend in kids under the age of 10 as being particularly high risk in what we're seeing against a background of general uptick. That uptick has happened disproportionately in the kids who have been thus far too young to access vaccination. I think this is observational data, so it doesn't tell us that that's the cause, but it certainly would be consistent with it. We sort of see an uptick happening where the data starts to separate in late September, and then we see a more sustained uptick across all demographics with the first November 3rd data set, but particularly that's when the lines and the slope of the lines really seem to diverge. This is the vaccination data. Again, this is derived from state data where the denominator is real individual data based on, I believe, location of residents from the state database. The denominator is a kind of actuarial population that's calculated based on historical census data and a kind of consistent methodology across communities. But particularly for towns like ours, you can end up with sort of data that's skewed. For example, if you look at 2029, you see 363 individuals with at least one dose, where the population estimate for how many people in this age range we would have is 271. And so that's really just a limitation of the data. I think those same limitations would occur from town to town, but I think it's important to highlight and acknowledge that that's kind of one of the limitations. So in the 5 to 11 group, we see a relatively large percentage of kids who have gotten the first dose of vaccine. At the time of this reporting, people wouldn't have been far enough out in general to be fully vaccinated yet, even if they got some of the earliest appointments. So we'll start to see that fully vaccinated subset grow over time, and likely the individuals with at least one dose rise as well. I think that was my last slide. Are there any questions about any of that kind of data and background?
I guess the only thing that I find a little interesting is that there seems to be a decent discrepancy in the percentage for the Dover versus Sherborn youngest age group. Do we?
I think that's probably artifactual right now.
Okay. All right. I was wondering.
I mean, I think it's definitely something to keep an eye out on, but I think we're early enough in the data, and the population estimates and kind of how accurate the denominator is, I think is hard to know. And so what I would say is I think it's too early to tell, and as more data comes in, I think we'll have a better sense. And then as the school gets to a place where they can kind of report out aggregate data for Pine Hill and Chickering, I think that will be helpful context as well.
So they actually, I think you weren't there this week, Matt, but they actually did run those numbers on Monday.
Okay.
And I want to say Pine Hill and Chickering were like neck and neck in the 60% range. So I think the Sherborn number being higher is probably artifactual. So the two elementary schools were basically equivalent in terms of first dose and in terms of fully vaccinated, which I think they already had like a couple dozen people already as of Monday, which those must have been the people with the very first appointments.
Yeah. And I will just anecdotally tell you, a coworker of mine has 2 children who fall in that age group. She does not live in Sherborn. And they were supposed to get their second vaccine today. And the pharmacy called them to say that that particular CVS was now out of children's doses. So she had to drive an hour to a completely different place. So I don't know what's, been happening in nearby pharmacies for,
I think there's been a lot of enthusiasm, especially as kind of
Mhm.
concerns about Omicron, I think are leading some people to reassess. I would say in general, and Matt, I'd welcome your experience as well. Like talking to peers, like the available vaccine slots are still in quite high demand for the young kids. And so, what I'm still hearing from friends is, folks who said I want a little bit of time are finding, it's still a couple of weeks out. I've heard similar things in terms of booster availability, that again, there's a lot of enthusiasm to pursue it right now, which I think is great, but that does impact access. I don't know, Matt, what's your experience been in terms of?
Yeah, I mean, the same. I will say anecdotally, I do know people being able to get their second shot is scheduled. And I just confirmed my kid's appointment for 2 days from now. So I'm hoping there's vaccine there. But I do think it is still booking a little further out. I will say that the schools are having a vaccine clinic. It's going to be at the region, open to any school age kid in Dover or Sherborn. That's going to be on Saturday, December 18th. And there will be communication coming out about that soon. So we're hoping for people that are still struggling with access, we'll have another opportunity for them a couple weeks from now.
That's great. I presume we'll post that on our website as well as town and school websites.
Yeah, I think we're waiting there's a registration process and we're just waiting to get the details on that.
Terrific.
And Matt, anything for the next to last graph that you showed that had things broken down, case rates by age groups?
Yep.
Anything that suggests we might be reevaluating school guidance sooner than later, or this is to be expected and it's okay?
So I think that our school guidance, said when the conditions are satisfied, and the conditions are no longer satisfied. So I think our existing guidance would say that unmasking at this moment in time would be inconsistent with the guidance that's been provided.
Okay.
And so I think our guidance remains applicable. I think one of the things that has changed, I think I have seen more limited data in terms of booster uptake, which I think is likely to be an increasingly important factor. And so, sort of anecdotally, what we've sort of heard and seen is that the booster uptake tends to be the more robust in our kind of people in the 8th and 9th decade of life, so people in their 70s and 80s, and that there's more variation as you get younger. And I think what we'll see is that the boosters likely are providing some benefit. Again, how much additional benefits conferred with Omicron will be really depend on how effective the vaccines are for Omicron in general. And so I think more to come on that topic. I think the CDC's updated their guidance to say that adults should get a booster, as opposed to previously had said they may get a booster. So I think we'll see that boosters becoming a sort of increasingly important part of the message in the context of the data we've talked about.
But I think important to point out that the CDC messages for adults, there currently isn't a booster recommendation for anyone under 18. So that won't impact school vaccination yet.
Thanks, Matt. Any other kind of questions or discussions on that topic?
I think I'm good.
Perfect.
I'm good.
Okay, back to the agenda. Does anyone who's attending have any questions or comments about COVID-19? Okay. I want to, as you know, on November 17th, 2021, we received an open meeting law complaint. And what I'd like is to ask the board to consider, or to have a motion to authorize the chair and or the vice chair to work with council on the open meeting complaint received 11/17/21.
So moved.
Second,
Seconded.
Any other discussion? Okay, Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye.
Okay. Mark, did you have, oh, yes, we amended the agenda
Yes.
item.
Yes, that's for 74 Washington Street. I
Mhm.
believe I can present it within 5 minutes if you think we can do it in these 5 minutes.
Oh, well, we
Oh,
have,
we got all kinds of time, Mark.
we have
Okay.
until 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
So as we reviewed 74 Washington Street at the last meeting. And since then, I've had a chance to visit the property and go inside the house, as well as the applicant, potential buyer, has also submitted their first proposal and second proposal. I guess to start off at the base, the house itself presents itself, in my view, as either a 7 or 8 room house. The second floor is easy. That you'll see on both proposals right there at the bottom left. 3 bedrooms. It's not difficult in any way to make any determinations there. The basement level, since I've been down there, the storage area, they're planning and committing to converting it to a storage room. They finished it. I think they were marketing the house probably to try to make it look good. So they actually painted the walls, and there's enough heat in the house to cause it to be a room that's heated. But at the same time, if they convert that over, the bonus room, I believe, in my view, from what I saw, is a pretty even flowing room where there's a fireplace. If you're looking at the top right floor plan, you'll see a fireplace, and it's pretty much open to the other area, and the stairs come down to that spot. So I feel it could be considered just one room if the other room gets converted to a storage room. So there's 4 at this point, 3 on the second, 1 on the basement level with the commitment to change the finished room that's called storage into storage. And they're committed to doing that. Then the area that's of some unique situation, it's the way they set it up. It could be considered either a 3-room or 4-room area. The great room, no problem. That is all one free-flowing room. The kitchen's the kitchen, so there's the second room. And then you have the L shape. The way they set it up, they have a dining table presently in the lower part of the L shape on the opposite, right there, perfect, Daryl. But then at the upper part, they have a nice little round table, which is the eat-in area. So in my view, I could call it either 3 or 4. It's open to some degree, but it's got functions that are a little different than, say, the downstairs L-shaped area. So even if I did say that the first floor was 4 rooms and the basement was 1 room and the second floor was 3 rooms, that gives them the opportunity to still get that additional room in the loft area of the garage. So I look at it that way. Although it could be considered 7 into 8, I'm looking at it because of the function of the first floor kitchen versus the area that they're using for dining as 4 rooms on that first floor. So again, 3 on the second floor, 4 on the first floor, the way I see it right now, 1 on the basement level with the proposal to remove the storage room, make it a storage room, that is. And then they have the opportunity to work on the loft on the second over the garage. With that said, I don't see a problem if they come in with the proposal to remove the storage in the basement and do the loft in the barn area as 1 room in the barn area.
And I think that's a second page. I think that's the proposal.
Yeah,
too.
and they have a second page. Now this second, thank you. The second proposal, I see it as, if they're truly, I don't see a problem. They don't have to convert that room with the fireplace into storage in my view, because it's just so open to the bonus room that I see it as a free flowing room that, if they want to go that route, then as long as they're truly storage and not heated, and unfinished ceilings and floors. Right now, they have finished ceilings and floors, but I don't see the need to convert that, in my view. I feel they don't need to make that an unfinished room. It flows enough into the bonus room where that is not an issue.
I guess for me,
Oh, sorry.
I would say I sort of feel much more comfortable with room 2 than room 1, just because I think in this case, we have some added room for me being in there, Mark, but
Yeah,
as a sort of a generic floor plan, if we go back up to proposal 1, Daryl, sort of how we, if we can just follow up, like how we sort of would typically treat a room like that, if that weren't the basement, for example, that was on a 2nd floor, and you said,
yeah.
So for me, that's a part where I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree with the premise, but I would say, thinking about how do I generalize this to other floor plans, I would struggle to feel consistent if we're saying this is 1 room with some of the other ones that we say these are 2 rooms.
Yes.
So for me, I would say I would be much more comfortable with proposal 2 than proposal 1. And Lisa, sorry, I think I cut you off.
No, that's fine. I was just trying to remember, was there like a half bath down there, or what sort of
the half bath is next to the library, I think, right?
Yeah, I
It's
don't
like a
know if it's
3/4
half
bath.
or full.
No, that's got a shower
Yeah, it's a
or
full bath.
something.
yeah, so what's in the basement? Is there any
Well, they did finish the basement. It
Right.
doesn't look bad, but as the applicant, or I would say the potential buyer, has indicated, it's not the best flooring. It is plank, but it's kind of.
I think.
No,
I
I meant like, is there any
bathroom down there?
Yeah, is there any plumbing? That's my
I didn't see any bathrooms.
There is no bathroom down there.
Okay. So I mean, I think that's I agree with you, Matt. Conceptually, 2 is a little bit more clear cut than proposal 1, but I think, it's really hard. I mean, I looked at the pictures. It looked really nice, I have to say. It's a lot nicer than my basement. I guess my other question is, why? So are those storage rooms, like, are those demising walls, or are those like real walls between, the bonus room and the storage areas, and then between the storage areas? That's the part I couldn't really tell from the photos. Like, are those full walls, Mark?
What was the question? I'm sorry, Lisa.
So between the 2 existing storage areas, so if you go up to 1, which is, I think, more indicative of what it looks like right now, right? The proposal 1 is really more what the basement. So if you go up to Daryl. So between the 2 storage rooms that are shown right now, are those full walls? Are they partial walls?
The back storage room is truly unfinished. It's basement floor, unfinished walls, cellar walls on the back side there, correct, right there. The second storage room, they finished the ceilings.
Right.
Has no electricity, but they did finish the ceilings and the floor, so it looks like a finished room.
Okay.
Not just looks, in my view, it is a finished room, and they're willing to take all that, the finished area down. I think if they did that, the room count doesn't become much of a concern any longer. Again, it's all in how you interpret the kitchen area / that L-shaped kitchen area, where the other side, they have 2 dining tables in there.
Right.
One's like an eating kitchen table, the other one's a dining table. They said
I actually kind of want to ask about that, because like, I'm not totally sold that's 2 rooms. I mean, it looks like it's staged as a dining room, but like, I don't know how realistic it is that like you would have a dining table a step away from another dining table.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
And so I guess I'm wondering if that's really 2 rooms, or if that's really like a hallway between the bathroom, the library, the stairs, and then an eat-in kitchen.
It's actually big enough to be a room, but I agree with you, Matt. I was having the same problem with it. I said, is it really 1 or 2? And then I said, well, comparing it to the basement room, that bonus room, we always consider a kitchen by itself having its own function. What they did, they put an eat-in type 4-seater where it says eat-in kitchen. And then the room's big enough where they put a long dining table in that other section of the L towards the library. Again, it's the way they staged it. It kind of can throw you off. I mean, you could just put 1 large dining table in there, but do we want to call it the dining room, or do we want to say it's part of the eat-in kitchen? It's not something that is critical, but I agree with you. It's not an easy call. we've looked at other L-shaped rooms that usually cause some discussion.
I do tend to agree with Matt V's inclination that like I think I'd be comfortable calling it one room, you know, on the first floor. But I think that adding that extra storage in proposal 2 really just helps seal the deal, because then
Okay.
so instead of having 2 sort of nebulous spaces, you only have like the semi-nebulous eating kitchen / dining area combined, and then that bonus room in the second proposal, it's really finite.
Yeah, no, and I think they both work. I agree with you, Lisa.
Remind me what the septic size is here. Was it a 3
It's
or
a 4-bedroom.
Oh, so either one's fine, realistically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
either one's fine. I just think proposal 2 is slightly clearer.
But I think even if we count that as a separate room in proposal 1, there's still
rounds
9.
down. It does round down, but it's just really when you take that into consideration with the slightly nebulous eating kitchen / dining area in terms of functionality, I think that.
Oh, but I think even if you count, oh yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Because they I'm sorry, they were at 8 because they were counting both of those as 1. I see. Yep.
So I to me, the second one's slightly more preferable.
I think my only
That's
other
pretty
comment-
much what I was thinking, because in the past, the issue I have is we've often had, I mean, there are some homes that don't have dining rooms. So is this one of those? Because for open plan concept homes, we have looked at functional areas that might not be separated by much between those functional areas. So this dances on the edge there.
Yeah, it's
terms of-
very, and to answer your question, Darrell, it's very open. It really is.
Yes,
When you
yes.
go in there, they labeled it at the first proposal as 2 rooms, but I even said to them, I said,
Yeah.
this is just one very large room.
Okay.
So I
where
guess-
it's,
I guess my only comment is, for the purposes of room counting, I do think, whether that's the kitchen is a kitchen or not matters, because I think otherwise we fall into the, any room that has any room not equipped as a kitchen on any level that has a door leading directly into a bathroom with a tub or shower is considered a bedroom. So if the space abutting the shower is not a kitchen, then whatever that room is a bedroom, right?
Even if it doesn't have a door.
I mean, I'm also okay saying, this is an eating
Yeah.
kitchen, kind of common kitchen dining area. For me, it passes the guide test, but if we start to say, just in thinking about being consistent, that, to me, that does not feel like a bedroom, but, the regulations are written as they are. And so I would say, for me, it's easier to say, it says eating kitchen, that's its sort of farm and function, and it may have a hybrid function as well, but it's part of that space, then it feels fine to me. If we ended up where they moved a wall and that connected to the library, then the library would obviously turn into a bedroom. So I think how we handle that space is somewhere in between those two.
Yeah, I would agree, Matt. The other thing I would say is the way it's proposed doesn't show any walls going up between the great room or the eating kitchen. It is a very open floor plan. Once I went in to view it, I realized how open it is. So it's better than what I thought, but this would have to be that they never be able to, make additional rooms without review.
Mhm.
I mean, I think
Okay.
we're gonna butt up against this more and more, and that people are, seem to be advocating for open floor spaces. So you can have a lot of different, almost sub functionality within an area that has 0 walls. I mean, that's just gonna happen more and more. So we just need to, move forward, but be mindful of that.
Yeah. And I do agree, the basement is nice looking,
It is really nice. Kudos.
So Sean, do you guys have any other questions as we've discussed, or anything else we can clarify?
I guess, did you have any additional questions about any of the floor plans or thoughts about future plans? I mean, we don't really have future plans other than kind of what you see proposed.
And then redoing and actually making the garage above the garage loft finished.
Correct.
Mhm.
So in this proposal where we wrote total room count, that's including if the garage was finished.
Yep,
Mhm.
yep, I think,
Understood.
yep. And then I think the big thing for the garage is right now, I think all of us feel comfortable calling it a room, but not a bedroom. I think the garage really can't get sort of a bathroom put in there without having that run into a bedroom issue. But if it's a sort of finished space without that setup, I think it's probably fine.
But it's a
Uh,
4-bedroom
yeah.
system, right?
Yes, it
that's
could
right.
be a bathroom if they so
Yeah.
chose. At the
Yeah, I did-
moment, assuming everything else stays the same.
Would have to obviously
Yeah.
put the connection to the septic and the sewage ejector pump and all that stuff, but I mean, we would intend to do that in the future, and so that's why, you know, this is so important, is that we would want above the garage to be a usable bedroom with.
So, yep,
least-
so you could do that if you can't, like, just knowing, like, right now for the room count we have, you were at 8 rooms, and so, like, you could add a room under the 4-bedroom system, fine, and you only have 3 bedrooms, that as how we would count them, so you could again add it that way, and you know, you'd sort of be fine for room count, you'd be fine for rooms above the 2nd floor with the 4-bedroom system if you finished it. But just to know that, like, the reason we're not counting it as a bedroom right now, we're generally rooms above the 2nd floor. If that were in the primary residence, you'd say that would be counted as a bedroom. It's the fact that it's the detached garage that doesn't make it turn into a bedroom, where the same room, the same space contiguous with the house would be treated as a bedroom. Does that make sense?
Yep, thanks for clarifying that.
If I can also add, it's a large space, so it would be just one large bedroom. If you were looking at an accessory unit, that opens up a whole new category of rooms that would have to be counted. And above and beyond the one large room would create more rooms than what you're allowed to have.
Yeah, it wouldn't be subdivided, it would just be an open room.
I just have to make a comment about the Eden kitchen. So just for my understanding, you guys are considering it being 2 rooms, a kitchen and a dining area, is that correct?
No, not at the
No, we're
moment.
not. We're
No.
not.
So right now, the 1st floor, you guys are only saying 3 rooms.
3, and then the basement 1, so that's 4. 3 in the 2nd floor, and then the loft, so that's 8.
Okay.
Divided by 8 divided by 2 is 4, which is consistent with what the design.
Okay.
And you guys are going with proposal 2?
I mean, I don't think we've decided that yet. I think Matt and I are fans, but I don't know for sure.
I struggle. So if we go to, can we go up to proposal 1 on the screen, Daryl?
Yes, and then I have a comment on that. A question I want to throw at the board.
So for me, like, looking at proposal 1, I just struggle with, you know, for spaces that sort of have as much separation where, you know, the same thing on a different floor, we would often say that's, you know, these are 2 rooms. If that was a dining room in one section, a living room in another, for example, you would quite comfortably say those are clearly 2 rooms, even though we've got an open archway between them. And so for me, it's a struggle of, you know, sort of calling the bonus room a giant asymmetric shape with a kind of with the waist on it. That feels much harder to me to count as a single room. I'm not totally sure I'm right, but that's sort of how I think about it, is like, if we were on the 1st floor and this was labeled dining room and family room, I would absolutely call them 2 rooms, even though there's not a door, there's an archway or a passageway, which is not uncommon. And so for me, that's my struggle with this plan. So for me, if I were counting this one, I would count this as a 9-room scenario, which could again still be compliant with a 4-bedroom system. I would count it as 2 rooms in the basement, 3 on the 1st floor, 3 on the 2nd floor, 1 in the loft with the finishing that you've described.
Could I just provide a little color too, just to the drawing itself? So it's not perfectly to scale. Like, the fireplace is actually much bigger than it shows in the drawing, and there's an electrical panel in the corner there. I'm not sure you noticed that. It's on the drawing. It's the space between those rooms is a huge space when you walk through it. I just,
So, I mean, that's
you would do anything in that room, like if it was kind of walled off and separated. I think the fireplace is really just for heating the house, versus, like, it's not a room you would sit in front of the fireplace and kind of hang out, I wouldn't say.
So I think, you know, it's clear that as kind of Mark walked through, that was really his experience of the space. I think both either scenario 1 or scenario 2 are permittable under a 4-bedroom system, because if you have 9 rooms that divide by 2 and round down, still keeps you in a 4-bedroom system. So you would be allowed to do either. In scenario 2, you have an extra room to work with if future plans involve additional differentiation. And, in scenario 1, from my personal view, like, just to be consistent with other plans, it looks like, you wouldn't have that room to play with somewhere else if you did an addition or something else in the future, unless you then reverted that room to a pure storage room.
So here's, along those lines, I think what would make me more comfortable is call it 2 rooms for now. You don't necessarily have to put up a wall. Call these 2, the room count is 9. And if someone is going to do work in the future that they'd rather put that 9th room somewhere else, then perhaps they would need to do something like what's proposed here. But you don't necessarily need to do this now.
I think that's where I'm at too. Like, I feel very comfortable calling, sort of saying there are only 3 rooms on the first floor. And so in that case, I think even if we call them 2 rooms downstairs, I think it just,
Yes,
it
they're
puts you
still
at the,
okay.
you're still okay. It puts you at the limit. And so it could be in the future, if you wanted, for example, to divide that loft space into 2 rooms, you'd have to do what you propose in proposal 2, but you don't have to do it now, I guess is what we're saying.
And if I may add, both proposals note that the storage room between the real store, that room there, correct, would still be committed to being unfinished.
Yeah.
And you can see a picture of that, because if you go down to the pictures, you see it when you look right there on the bottom left. That's the storage room you're looking into, not to the left, but in the middle of that picture. That's the storage room right now.
It is painted, so it looks like it's not.
In fact, it's to the right too. I'm sorry, you took a nice picture of the middle, that storage room with the finished ceilings and walls. But
I mean,
that's
sort
committed on
of
both.
finished walls.
Painted
I
concrete,
agree.
not drywall. On the
Yeah, I
right.
think we're not going to make you strip the paint off the walls. That's
Exactly.
fine.
All right, so does that seem like something you want to consider, or you want to think about it for a bit in terms of
Well, I
which
mean, I
plan
think
you're
that-
going with? Or
Yeah.
I guess,
think so.
like, we don't have a building permit right now. Like, this is just like kind of anticipatory guidance as you make decisions to purchase. Is that right?
That's correct, Matt. It's not, it's a preliminary review. And they still have an active septic and well issues that have to be resolved. They don't own the house presently, but they're aware of it. They have the letter we sent out, I think it was about 7 years ago. This sat for 7 years and they didn't finish the septic, some parts of it as well as the wells. So they still have a little bit more work to do on that before any building permit could be issued.
Yeah, we're chasing all those issues down, and there, I believe though, correct me if I'm wrong, there is a permit, because there is a general contractor out there that has been working for the current owner, and so we're interfacing with them just to make sure that they complete all their work before we close on it later this month. But they're flexible, though. That's the whole point, is that they're flexible with the outcome of this. So they're saying, hey, if you need to put a wall up, we'll put a wall up. If you don't, we won't. So I mean, that work would be done based on the outcome of this meeting. Like, if they need to take unfinished something or pull up the stick on laminate flooring, or take some ceiling tiles down, like, they're going to do that now based on what you decide.
And so I think for us, Sean, neither proposal requires you to unfinish anything. It's really just the question of, if you want another room in the future to play with, then I think you probably need to do proposal 2. And I'm not counting the loft above the garage. I'm treating that as finished space in both scenarios. So it's really kind of up to you guys. If you say, boy, we've got another set of things we're thinking about down the road that is subdividing or changing the great room or putting up a wall somewhere else to create an additional room, then I would say unfinish the storage area in the corner pocket with the fireplace. If you're not planning that, then whatever you guys prefer in terms of how you want your new home to be would be permissible.
But I think either way, if you want to finish the loft, you have to unfinish that middle storage room in the basement, correct?
Understood. So we're
Yes.
not planning to finish the loft, in the short term here. So I think proposal 1 would make sense. And then when I think what you're saying is when we are ready to do that work, we would then need to make it look like proposal 2 and put that wall up.
Sean,
Yeah.
I think what they're saying is
Sorry.
they're considering the loft a room right now in these counts.
Okay.
And if, let's just say one day above the loft is actually another floor, but it's, there's angles on the sides, but it's a full floor. You could stand up, it has a window, everything. If we wanted that third level of the barn, which is the second level of the loft, finished one day, then we would have to convert the fireplace into storage.
Correct.
You guys are saying.
Oh.
So to proceed with the seller and the contractor, we're going to tell them we're going to go with proposal 1, which is for now saying that the basement has 2 rooms.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
And if I can just help with some of the confusion on the building permit, a building permit has not been issued for any of the changes to the room as of yet. I interjected in the building application process that the room count was above and beyond the 4-bedroom septic system allowance. So it's still in the pending phase under our requirements. But what needs to happen now is you can work with the buyer, with the seller, to put your plans on that building application so they can be reviewed and approved.
Okay.
Okay. So it sounds like you have a plan, but it certainly as you contact the potential buyer and have questions, you can always reach out to Mark.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot.
Appreciate everything.
And just for the record, these are the potential buyers, Daryl, and
Oh, okay.
and the seller is the one that the present owner is the one that has the building application out.
Okay.
Thank you.
I wasn't sure if this was construction crew. All right. Thanks.
Have a good night, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think we have a variety of permits that we can renew.
Yep. Okay. So we have 5 disposal works installer permit renewals, and they are renewals in all cases, correct? So we do have experience with each of these firms.
Yeah, that's correct, Daryl. For some
For
reason, Wind
applicants.
River, they like to have each one of their people that install. They usually just do distribution boxes, but they like to get each one certified, which I think is very appropriate. And the other 2 have worked with me, not often. We don't see DMP and Sons and WC Row that often, but again, they have been licensed. In fact, WC Row, I think, has been licensed for many, many years, but they don't do much work in town. But I don't see any issue with any of the requests and would recommend approval.
Okay,
Conditional
and exactly.
Conditional to pre-construction. Thank you.
Yes. So do we have a motion to approve these 5 permit renewals conditional to pre-construction meeting?
So moved.
Second,
Any other comments? Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye.
Okay, and we have some food establishment permit renewals for approval, and Ellen has the food inspector provided comments about these.
Yes, he recommended approval for both of them.
Okay,
And
So we
Daryl, just if I
yes.
may interject, they've submitted their well reports, and I did review them, and they're within the required standards. It's the way they're presented. I had to call the lab on another food establishment because they highlight the results when they're over the testing detection limit, but not over the maximum contaminant level. So they are in good order, though.
All right. So we have for Sweet Meadow Feed and Grain and also Sherborn Fuel. So do we have a motion to approve these 2 food permit renewals?
Sherborn Fuel conditional to a sodium posting.
Thank you.
And Daryl, can I correct myself? I was only
Yes.
speaking on behalf of the on Sherborn Fuel, not on Sweet Meadow.
Regarding the water. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Shall we do them separately since one has sodium, Ellen? Would that make it easier?
Yeah, probably vote separately, yeah.
All right. So do we have a motion to approve the permit renewal for Sweet Meadow Feed and Grain?
So moved.
Second,
Any other comments? Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, I.
Matt Vitale, aye.
And do we have a motion to approve the permit renewal for Sherborn Fuel subject to a sodium posting? Excuse me.
So moved.
Seconded.
Other comments? Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, I.
And we have,
Matt Vitale, aye.
oh, sorry. Do we have a motion to approve the tobacco and nicotine delivery product sales permits for Sherborn Fuel and Sherborn Wine and Spirits?
So moved.
Seconded.
And Ellen, has the inspector provided any comments on these?
No, he had no comment.
Okay, so I know that there was an issue at, I believe, Sherborn Wine and Spirits with posting about tobacco sales, but I believe that was when they first took over, and that has been resolved. Okay, so we have the motion. Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, I.
Matt Vitale, aye.
Okay. How are we on time? Good. Let's see, let's do the DNA. Just pull that up. Okay. So does anyone have any questions on this? We've had similar invoices in the past. These nursing services are largely contact tracing and outreach to positive cases.
I guess the only piece is, just some acknowledgement that some of these totals could go up since the CTC's shut down now. Is that right?
Yes.
And so previously we had some subset of these cases that were traced by the state, and that'll now revert to all local tracing.
Good
And so
point for what's
I'm
coming
certainly-
next.
I'm supportive of this, and it certainly seems commensurate with the work done. But just to kind of flag as an issue for general awareness that in the absence of state tracing, was likely see an uptick in these costs, assuming steady case volumes.
Yes, and I believe we were seeing invoices in the thousands in the past before the state contact tracing service was available. All right, so do we have a motion to authorize Ellen to pay, or to authorize the town to pay VNA for their services?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any other comments? Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, I.
Matt Vitale, aye.
Okay, let's see.
And do-
We have
do you
enough
wanna
time
discuss-
for budget. What?
Let's
Were you-
get started on budget, and then if we need more time, we can continue after the hearing.
We could do minutes too, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Why don't we do budget first and then minutes if we've got time?
Okay, so at the moment, Well, Ellen, is there anything special you'd like to highlight? I think the things that caught my eye from the guidance is that we usually see cost of living adjustments, the COLA, that are lower than 4. So this has been higher than we've seen in recent years. And that's been a pretty much straight amendment to the various salaries.
Can I ask just, the one follow-up question I had was for the new equipment line.
Yeah,
Which I think is,
it's really not new equipment. There just isn't a line item in the budget. I can talk with the accountant, the interim town accountant, and she can
Perfect.
probably change the title. But it was just, this is just based on the actual lines in the budget, which
perfect
right now there isn't one.
for this.
For
And so
this.
that's the Sharps contract that we talked about pre-COVID. to
Right.
kind of
Yes.
allow local. And is that currently accessible in terms of availability and access to town buildings?
It hasn't been advertised yet. I did send the company an email early, I think it was on Monday. I haven't heard back from her about if it should have some maintenance since it's sat unused for a while, or if she had any recommendation. I also wanted to know if this figure is still accurate, will still be accurate for fiscal year 23.
Okay.
So that might actually change. I just haven't heard back.
And so while we haven't broadcast its availability, is that something we can do or would be appropriate for us to do once we sort of can confirm that everything is sort of up and running and functioning properly? And in terms of in terms of its current physical location, is it in the police station? I can't remember where it went.
It is in the police station, and I will want to verify with them that they're okay with people coming in. I can't imagine they wouldn't be at this point, but I don't know.
Perfect.
I have a couple questions when you guys are done.
Oh, I'm good.
So 2 questions I have. One is if a food inspection location or a camp inspection location has violations that necessitate multiple revisits and follow-up, do they bear the cost of that, or do we have to just keep paying Tom out of our budget?
We have been paying him out of our budget.
And
So-
we have also contemplated having additional fees when there's sort of
Re-inspections.
out of the ordinary assistance required. And the advisory committee, when I last spoke to them pre-COVID about that, I believe it was pre-COVID, they were supportive of that concept, but we haven't instituted what those fees would be.
So I think that's legitimate, and that's something we should proceed on, that for any necessitated re-inspections due to violations or multiple re-inspections. I think the costs for the inspection should be borne by the, entity that had the violations.
Okay, would you be willing to give that a little thought about how we would, what kind of charges there would be? We do have something called a re-inspection fee. That's a little bit different than the standard when Tom goes back to check on progress being made with any violations or deficiencies. And, could be that kind of a flat fee, or it might be a different sort of fee. So if you'd like to put together some notes just so that we have a starting point for a discussion.
Yeah,
Okay.
Ellen, if you can email me what our current rate schedule is for food or camp inspections and whatever the re-inspection fees are, just so I have like a starting point, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, well, the fee schedules are all online. You can find it, but I can certainly email it to you as well.
That would be a lot faster.
Okay, I will be happy to do that.
Okay, that's one
I will
thing.
just say, if you are going to institute some new fees, just be aware that that is considered a regulation and you have to have a public hearing with public.
Mhm. Yeah.
I guess I wasn't thinking, oh yeah, I guess.
The
Yeah,
fee schedule is a regulation.
all right. So if we were gonna just say that any, like after the second re-inspection, the, violator would have to bear
Yeah,
the fees, that would be considered a fee change.
yes,
Okay,
it's a new fee.
all right.
Because they would have to be billed and then, what if they don't pay?
Well, I would charge them before, and then,
Yeah.
the punishment is that they can't open. So,
And Lisa, your idea is an excellent idea. When I worked in a different town, we used the same system. And
Yeah.
if they don't pay, Ellen, they don't get their permit the next year.
yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty straightforward. Although we've had people who've operated without permits too, so there's that.
And you also want to give them the opportunity to be aware that you're making that fee so that they'll know in advance.
Right, like, yeah, I think it's an incentive, it's a carrot, right? And then the second thing I just wanted to make people aware of is, based on the results of the private well PFAS testing, there were some wells in Sherborn that were either above the 20 parts per trillion for the 6 PFAS regulated constituents, or, certainly detectable. And I guess I am wondering what we want to put in reserves for that, or is that something that the select board or someone else is going to deal with? But someone's going to have to deal with this in the upcoming year, because DEP is not necessarily allocating funding for doing things like mitigation or providing, consulting for anyone who's below the 20 parts per trillion or even above the 20 parts per trillion. So I don't know what the implications are, but I'm just letting people know that there were several wells that had detectable levels of PFAS that were tested on a voluntary basis. So the homeowners went into this knowing what the, potential repercussions were, as we discussed ad nauseum. But I'm just wondering, I'm just putting that out there if that's something we want to put some kind of budget on.
Okay.
I guess, can we include that as an agenda item for the December 15th meeting? Just because it does seem like something that would be appropriate to represent and do, but then figuring out with the select board sort of what makes sense as next steps.
Well, and also what sort of role we want to have in that.
So Daryl, I see it's 8 o'clock. I'm wondering if it would be okay with you if we transition to opening the hearing, and then if it's all right with you, I'd like to kind of introduce and frame it.
Oh, and by the way, I just realized I can't make the December 15th meeting. I have a work conflict. So it's fine to discuss, and I'm happy to provide some input offline.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
Maybe if you can give some kind of initial guidance and thoughts to Ellen, and we can discuss and kind of think through implementation.
Okay.
Right, and also consider what role the Board of Health
Yeah, that's the part
typically has in this, right? It's not
Right.
a straightforward
No.
task. And what else was I going to say? All right, and we can revisit some of these other items too, as well. As Ellen said, depends on what kind of confirmation she gets on some questions she put out there regarding the budget. All right. Sorry, I'm just admitting a lot of people, so I keep getting distracted and more. All right, hold on. We really need a new system. Okay, so we have an appeal hearing scheduled for 8 p.m. As you can see, the petitioners are Mary and Brian Moore, appealing a decision that the Board of Health made on November 3rd, 2021, for Farm Road, 53 Farm Road. At that time called Lot 2 at 55 Farm Road, potentially. It was for a new septic and a new well permitting.
And Daryl, if it's okay with you, would you be okay opening the hearing and then I can kind of introduce the discussion?
Yes, and Ellen, do we need, ordinarily I just open the hearing, but I can't recall, do we need a roll call vote to open a hearing? I don't think so.
I
But
don't think so, but you should read the appeal hearing notice.
yes, okay. All right, hold on. What was that titled again?
It should be the appeal hearing notice.
Ellen, is that titled appeal letter? Is that what you're describing?
It's the notice that it just says notices here. Do you want me to read it?
Yes, that would be great.
It just says the notice is hereby given that the Board of Health will hold a virtual appeal hearing on Wednesday, December 1st, 2021 to consider the following petition for a finding under the Sherborn Board of Health regulations for sewage disposal and domestic water supply. The notice then gave the location saying it's a virtual hearing via Zoom. It provided they log in information and dial in information. And then just 8 o'clock, an appeal of Mary and Brian Moore on a decision by the Board of Health to grant a permit for 53 Farm Road, formerly known as 50 Lot 2 at 55 Farm Road. New septic, new well, 21 106 107, and new well plan 2197 approved 9/1/21.
Okay, perfect. And then is it okay if I provide some introductory comments and go from there?
Yes, and then with the general format being your comments, the applicants, and then for the permit applicant to be able to make comments as well.
Perfect. So for the purposes of granting an appeal, it needs to be demonstrated that as it relates to the facts of the previously granted permits for the property of 53 Farm Road, that there is either new data to present, that there are at least three additional professional consultant opinions submitted, or that there are different situations or conditions that exist since the previous Board of Health ruling. So one of those three conditions must be satisfied. Additionally, the appellant would need to demonstrate that their claimed injury is one that is non-speculative and is a substantial injury to them personally, as opposed to as a member of the general population. For the purposes of tonight's hearing, the Moores will be allowed to present their information. Mr. Murchison, the applicant, will be allowed to respond, and the Board of Health will then discuss whether the criteria for appeal has been met. Any of the comments should be limited to the factual circumstances for the permits under discussion as they relate to the criteria that I've described. I think it should go without saying, the commentary on the character of a participant is not in scope for this evening's hearing. The discussion itself will be limited to the appellant, the applicant, and the Board of Health, and the hearing will not otherwise be open for a period of general public comment. So first for the board, are there any concerns or discomforts with that? And then I'll ask the Moores as the appellants and Mr. Murchison if they have any concerns with that approach. So first for the board, any concerns with what I've described?
Do you think it'd be reasonable if there are people in attendance who have a clarification question to ask?
I mean, I think for us, it like my personal piece is, I think for us, it's, you know, while there may be many feelings about the project, the scope of the appeal is kind of narrow and specific. And
Yes,
so I think that it may be more appropriate if we identify questions that we can seek clarification rather than a sort of a more general discourse. Because like right now, I think the Moores are the ones who have a standing to appeal. And so other folks may have other facts, but I think the Moores are sort of the folks appealing.
Yes, I wasn't saying comments, but if someone just had a question about something that has been said for clarification, that's all. But we'll see how it goes. Maybe that won't happen.
Any other discussion from the board?
No.
Perfect. And for the Moores, any concerns with that approach?
I don't think we have as long as we're allowed to comment on the application that we're appealing. I don't see that we have a problem with that.
So you guys will get to make the initial set of comments raising the concerns that you raised, and then Mr. Murchison will have an opportunity to respond to those, and then we'll deliberate. And then go. I thought I heard somebody else. Mr. Murchison, does that sound satisfactory to you as well?
Yes, Matt. I would make one comment that when you open the appeal hearing, you said it was an appeal on new well plan 21-97, which was approved on September the 1st. I don't believe the appeal period was still open for that permit when this appeal was made. So I would ask, first of all, that you dismiss that particular appeal.
And so then it would be, in fact, it would be new well permit 21-106, 107.
No, but what I said is when Ellen read the appeal, she said that under appeal was new well plan number 21-97, which was approved on September the 1st. I think it's pretty obvious to anyone that the appeal was not filed in a timely manner for that permit.
So maybe, Bob, I think that, Ellen, let me just pause there. So my recollection is that as we proceeded with this, the previous well permit was rescinded and the new well permit was rolled over. If you'd like to include that in your comments, you're certainly welcome to after the Moores have done their piece, and we can include that in the discussion for the board. But sort of otherwise, process-wise, in terms of the Moores having the introductory comments, you following up and the board deliberating. Do you have
I have no objection to that.
Okay, perfect.
Could I just?
Oh, go ahead, Ellen.
I just wanted to say that yes, I did read that, but that is how the appeal came in, and that's how it was noticed. So that well permit had been approved September 1st. It was rescinded later on the 17th of November. But it was on the appeal received from the Moores, so that's why it was on the notice.
Okay. So maybe with that, we'll transition, and Brian, you're welcome to kind of make the points that you'd like to make. Again, I'd ask that you kind of stick to the conditions that the appeal is kind of relevant for, which is on the screen as well right now.
I understand. And so both Mary and I each have prepared individual comments, and we'll try to stick to the point and make it brief.
Yeah, so I'll go first. So as noted in our letter requesting the hearing, we believe that the ground for the appeal is new data that was not presented, discussed, or considered as part of the decision to approve the SAS and the house at 53 Farm. Although our letter requesting the hearing was signed by us alone, there are many neighbors and abutters who provided us with input and supported our request for this hearing. Because the Board of Health bylaw didn't really specifically specify the manner that the appeal should be delivered, we signed on behalf of neighbors, and that's how it was submitted. As we've said numerous times, we're not opposed to the applicant developing land that he owns. We simply believe that a project of this magnitude should be afforded a public review process that looks at the full project and approves it as a single project. We're asking that the Board of Health and other town boards consider the full scope of the project in their permitting discussions to help protect our rights and the people who buy these homes, and to ensure that no unintended negative impact happens to groundwater, wells, property, et cetera. We want to acknowledge that the applicant did share information with us that included materials that were shared at the pre-application hearing on 10/28. And we also understand that he had suggested that that be a public meeting with the town planner. I just also want to just say we recognize that you guys are a volunteer board, and we're very grateful for your time, and your willingness to serve in Sherborn. Our intent is certainly not to create more work for anybody, but really We appreciate your time and consideration of this appeal. And I think Brian has some comments he wants to share.
Yes, so good evening, and thank you for taking our appeal and being willing to act on it, at least here tonight and maybe in the future meetings. Mary and I are, for those of you who are uninitiated, are abutters to 55 Farm Road. We know Bob and Allison, and our group consists of several of the neighbors and people from the neighborhood who are concerned about the scope of the project that is being proposed next door. I wanted to put a couple of thoughts in front of the board members for their consideration while deliberating on our request for an appeal. And those come in the form of an acronym, which Lisa knows consultants love. I came up with the acronym SCOPE because I think it's so appropriate. S stands for the scope of this project. This project is not a 2-acre single-family house. It is a 16-acre development that's proposed for Farm Road right next to where we live. And C stands for the connectedness of these parcels. When you look at the individual maps that have been presented to the boards, many of which have been screenshotted at your own meetings, there's no way that this applicant would be able to develop this size project without utilizing just about every last little bit of 55 and 65 Farm Road as a single project. In doing so, he's basically stacking up a whole series of septics into about 1.5 acres of land, right up gradient of the wetlands, which abut our property, right up gradient of the stormwater system at the front of the property, and right near where all the neighbors' wells are. And protective radius or not, we're talking about 1.5 acres of septic fields, which is a concern because of the size of the project, 9 houses. The 9 houses were presented at the 1028 meeting. My understanding is the soils report that was provided to the Board of Health was not accompanied by any applications whatsoever. It was rather delivered as a soils report without really any serious requests for the Board of Health to act upon. And therefore, I think the 1028 meeting really serves as a new information date that the board should consider as the town receiving new information relative to the scope and the connectedness of these individual parcels. OP stands for the opportunity for protection. This project is so large that to individually permit the houses, the driveways, the individual septics, the individual wells, one at a time, really doesn't take into consideration the size of this project. And as an example, the state has provisions for projects of this size, which specifically call out the need to do site-specific groundwater modeling for the septic systems. And there are limitations on nitrogen loading and phosphorus loading in such sensitive areas. Yet by applying for these projects on a one-off basis, the applicant is really not giving the town the opportunity to scrutinize these projects, what their implications will be as a whole. The board should be aware that us and our neighbors have also filed an appeal to the order of conditions that was issued recently by the Conservation Commission for this very foundation and for the SAS system that goes with it on so-called 53 parcel. And we filed that information with the Regional Office of Mass DEP. So if the board were to be considering this, they might want to keep in mind that we're appealing that decision as well. We've hired counsel to look at the deed restrictions that were in place when the applicant purchased these properties, which clearly stated that there were restrictions in perpetuity that should travel with the deeds that would restrict the use of these parcels to single family residences. For some reason, the applicant is not adhering to those conditions, and we have an attorney looking into it, but that takes time and money. And that's something that we just need this time to look at it. And we also are limited in our opportunity to get any other opinions about the claims for the suitability of the soil for the SAS systems, because just about every professional that I know in this area who we've contacted either has to conflict out or is working for the town on some other project, or they're not interested in getting involved in a project that, you know, might get litigious at some point in time. So maybe that bar is a little too high for us as abutters to be able to get over that bar to provide those extra opinions, but we are continuing to try to do that. And the last letter E from scope is that the board is really establishing a precedent here for how they're going to accept open space projects. And if they're willing to accept these types of projects as, you know, death by 1,000 cuts, let's let them permit every little corner of this thing individually to allow them to skirt the responsibility of presenting one comprehensive plan, then that's the way we're headed with this decision. Both Mary and I and all of the neighbors really feel that the board should reconsider their decision to grant this approval based on the fact that this is an open space project. It should be considered as such by this board and afforded that type of scrutiny rather than being treated as if he's just going to build this one house and go on his merry way. Everything that was distributed from the 1028 meeting clearly shows 9 houses. It clearly shows this is one of those 9 houses and is part of this larger project. So if our only hope is that the board considers the scope, and those are all capital letters because it's an acronym, of this project moving forward. And thank you for hearing our appeal tonight.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bob, are you ready?
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Bob.
I don't really have a whole lot to say. I have not read anything in the Moore's appeal. I certainly respect that they're very passionate about this, and they have every right to be passionate about it. But I read their appeal, their written appeal, and now I've listened to the oral argument, so to speak, and I haven't heard anything new. You know, all of these things have been discussed for multiple hours at 2 different Board of Health meetings, and at the meeting 2 meetings ago, 4 weeks ago, you all voted to approve this, and your rules say that in order for an appeal to be considered, that there needs to be new information. And so I don't really kind of feel a need to rebut or make arguments that we've already discussed over and over again. You know, the data that Brian's talking about possibly someday there being 9 homes as part of different types of zoning approaches to various aspects of the land. That was, you know, presented to Daryl and many folks in the town and to the Moores and to this board on October 28th. It's not new information post November 3rd when you made your approval. Brian made a number of other comments that are completely out of scope for the Board of Health, and I'm not going to address them. I'm happy to address them in the proper forum. I understand the Moores don't think that the zoning laws should be what they are, but even if I wanted to develop in a way that the Moores would like me to develop, the laws wouldn't allow me to. I have to follow the way the laws are written. If I'm going to build A&R houses, I come one at a time, I submit plans, I follow all of the setbacks for single family homes, and that's what I have to do. So, you know, I'm not going to spend a lot more time kind of rebutting this because there's no new information, and frankly, we're complying with what are extremely rigorous setbacks and all other types of regulations in this particular home on a little more than 1 acre in Sherborn. And if and when we come with formal applications for additional permits, we will comply with all of those rigorous setbacks and rigorous procedure. We just will. And so I just don't think there's a whole lot more for me to say, and I thank you.
Thanks so much, Bob. So maybe we'll now open with comments from the board. Rebecca, I see your hand up. If you want to open us off.
Did you have a comment?
I did, but I always have a comment.
I'll wait for you. I'll wait for you. I might have a different point.
Okay, sure. So for me, I think, this goes back to, kind of, at least my reaction is this goes back to what are the rules? What is sort of the question at hand? And so I think that this is a specific hearing that's related specifically to the decisions that were rendered for 53 Farm Road. I think that the question of, sort of the larger context becomes a question of, whether this satisfies the requirement for new data to be presented or a different condition that exists. And then I think it still, for me, also goes back to the fact that there needs to be a sort of specific individual harm as opposed to speculative harm. So for me, not speaking to the merits of the larger, sort of how do the projects connect and not weighing in on that either way, but the specifics of does the permit granted for the well at 53 Farm for either the SAS or the well provide a specific harm as opposed to a potential harm. It doesn't seem like it meets that criteria for me personally, although I think what remains unanswered are questions about sort of other portions of the project. My kind of opinion about whether we've satisfied the appeal for 53 doesn't resolve those issues. And I think those aren't what's specifically before us tonight. It's really, is there new information that was unknown to the board? And does that, do the things that we granted have a demonstrable harm to the moors that is kind of not a potential harm, but a realized harm? And with that, I will cheerfully go on mute.
Lisa, would you like to speak?
No, I was gonna let Rebecca go first.
Okay, her hand is down, but go ahead, Rebecca.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So if you recall, on the very first hearing where this well was approved, I had an objection to the original well, because although it met the letter of the law, I didn't believe at the time it met the intent of our regulations, which are intended to represent every member of the town, both abutters and applicants equally. And I felt that this original well was what would be considered to be a spite well, putting the abutters into a position where they would not be able to do any work on their own system if it failed without requiring a variance. And Mr. Murchison did have the ability to put this well in another location that would not have created that situation. So that was my original objection. However, and I think that's still a consideration here, but it's a little bit water under the bridge because the well has been drilled. But I don't agree with the statement that there is not new information. It was not made clear to the Board of Health until after the well was approved that the size or scope or nature of the intent of this particular type of situation. There may be a true public health argument raised. However, we are in a very challenging situation because our town has, considering that these are private wells, private water supplies, this is not regulated by DEP to protect drinking water quality and quantity. However, we do have methods that are used to quantify those things under regular circumstances with public water supplies and other circumstances that are regulated by the DEP. If it had been clear to the Board of Health, we would have required those measurements and considerations as part of a routine evaluation before wells and other permits are awarded to applicants. So I think that there is some merit to the request for more public input when a project is of this magnitude. And I don't believe that the Board of Health, as a complete board, it's possible that conversations take place out of a public hearing, but I don't believe that the entire board was fully aware of the size and scope of this proposed project until after this well was proposed. So I do believe that we, as a town and as a Board of Health, in the absence of statutory protection, that we should be considering the proposed issues in detail and with some thoughtful perspective.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. Lisa, do you want to comment next?
Sure, and I'll be brief. You know, I will say on a personal level, I was not aware of the contemplation of multiple homes, which are indeed, as indicated in communications we've received from Bob's attorney, they are individual single-family homes. I don't think anyone is contesting that. But I think sort of what I was surprised about is that, you know, I was unaware of that. You know, it wasn't like that was something before the board. Like, this is the first step in a proposed project, which is listed as a site in the submittals that I saw following the initial approval of a single well for a single family, you know, lot. It's presented as a project. There was multiple soil testing done on multiple properties and multiple locations with the intent of having a common road with multiple homes on, you know, roughly acre-ish type lots. And that is different than the typical scenario of I am building a new single family home, which is kind of what the regulations right now, you know, are sort of geared to for new construction. And so I guess, you know, what I'll just put out there is, although we might not have explicit requirements under our current regulations, it seemed a little disingenuous to present this as it's a sole single development that you should consider as a unique entity, without sort of contemplating that, well, actually, we were always contemplating this as a single project with a single site with multiple developments and multiple, you know, wells and multiple septics in, you know, a rather condensed area. And I just think that the cumulative effect of that should be considered in terms of the quality and quantity of water, you know, in the future. And so I just, to me, I guess if something is being contemplated as a single site, it would be much better if the applicant presented it as such, so that the cumulative impacts of the entire project could be evaluated and considered in terms of what the potential effects would be. And, you know, so again, that's not what we were presented. That's not what we're, you know, the focus of this appeal, but I'm putting this forth as something to be mindful of for the future. And that, you know, if there is a contemplation of a project with multiple parcels, it should be presented as such to the board.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Matt, do you have any comment to add?
Yeah, I don't know that it's that different, but I think I'll say my piece regardless. I agree that I do feel like there is something that feels a little different in how it was presented to us versus at the prior meeting. It's not clear to me, you know, we discussed in our prior meeting whether this was part of a larger project, and that was a sort of a question we had. So I think it is something we had considered. I think that's a little, you know, I think in places it's been presented as a single site and there is a single project. And so one could consider it that way, but I think it's also possible to consider this parcel independent of the 65 parcel, which is really not what we're here to discuss, but I think that's much more clearly a single project. And so I have a little bit of difficulty there and really saying that, we weren't at least aware that there was something else, planned. I think, so it's a little bit hard for me to know that. I also want to sort of go back to the question of harm. I think it's also unclear if this single parcel clearly causes real harm. I can understand that there may be potential with the development of sort of this in the context of everything else. But I'm not sure that sort of changes the picture for me. I do think when it comes time to consider 65, that's not what we're doing. I think it's pretty clear that needs to be considered in aggregate, but I'm not sure we need to do 53 along with it. So I think I remain uncertain as to whether, there is some new information. I'm not sure it materially changes things. And I'm still uncertain about the question of real harm at this point, which isn't to say that, there isn't potential harm, but that's not what we're talking about. We need to show real harm.
And then Daryl, do you want to kind of close this out? We can kind of take a straw poll where folks are at.
Yes, so I have a number of things, but before I do, I'd like to ask if, yes, Marion Neutra has her hand up. Excellent. I'd like her to maybe just provide some background on I think it was October 28th meeting about the larger project, just for context, and then I'll get on with my comments. So Marion, is that okay with you? Oops, you're on mute, Marion.
Sorry, that's my favorite trick. Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to speak up. This is a situation in which I think Matt Vitale summarized it well. You really just have to follow the regulations. And that's what a developer has to do no matter who they are. And they've got to follow your regulations. But I want to just back up a minute to the planning board regulations and the zoning law and that October 28th meeting. First of all, to create some A&R lots when there's sufficient frontage, a developer, no matter what else he's doing, has every right to create A&R lots. If he's got plenty of frontage on the road, which in this case he does, there's nothing that says if you have a large property, you can't create an A&R lot plus do something else with the rest of the property. There's no law against that. And, we may not like it, but that's the law. You can do it. So I just want to clear that up, first of all. And the fact that everybody wants to see the larger project, of course. And that's exactly what the October 28th meeting was about. That's a meeting that is not a public hearing. It's not even a public meeting. It was a bigger meeting than we even intended, because we wanted to include a few other folks there, like a representative of Board of Health. The pre-application conference is not a requirement, but a request in the planning board rules and regulations regarding subdivisions. Any project that includes a subdivision should have a pre-application conference to show the planning board what the whole idea is. But the pre-application conference is not an application and it's not a hearing. It's supposed to be a conversation, a two-way conversation between the developer or owner of the land and the planning board and representatives of other boards if they want to come in and weigh in, just to give the developer guidelines as to what will be acceptable and what won't be acceptable, and to exchange ideas about what would be best. And that's exactly what happened at that meeting. It was not a public meeting. And that kind of conversation, really largely a very friendly conversation, couldn't have happened if it were a public hearing. That's not the point. It's not a public hearing. It's to prepare the developer in a way to refine the plans so that it's more likely to be approved by the boards, but it doesn't bind him to do anything at all. So that's one thing. There's no question that an A&R lot on a road can be created and a subdivision created in the rest of the land. And that's basically what Mr. Murchison is doing. So, you know, I was combing and listening carefully through what was said, looking for violations of any regulation, like any zoning law, any Board of Health regulation. And I didn't hear anything new, at least. I would also add that if you approve one well on one A&R lot, and incidentally, this well was moved, Rebecca, so that it made enough room, moved far enough from a driveway. I don't know what it did to the neighbors to move it further away from the neighbors, but it was moved. So in addition to not hearing anything new, I just put out a plea to please, you know, stick to the regulations. And even though what I started to say was, say a well is approved, yes, that might affect what else happens on the property. But putting in a well like this, one well on an A&R lot, can only restrict the developer. It can't allow him to do things that he otherwise wouldn't be able to do, because it would restrict him from where other septics can be placed, other wells can be placed. So I don't see that that is a loss in terms of water quality. And, you know, I'm the biggest advocate for water quality that you'll find in town, one of the biggest. And I am sure that the regulations have to be followed here. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks so much, Marion. Daryl, do you want to comment, and then we can go to Paul?
So I think I most closely share comments that Lisa had offered earlier. But I think as I look at whether there is new data presented, and I think the data that we had before, the issue, and the reason I asked Marion to go first is there was information presented on October 28th, but it's not firm plans. And I do think that the decisions that the Board of Health makes are with applications and plans that are before us that have already gone through review by the agent. They're very detailed about what's going to take place. And the information provided thus far on the greater project is speculative at the moment. And we have been advised to not base any perhaps changes in our prior approval on speculative issues. And although I think that could be important for the overall performance of the project and integration in the town, I think that we are limited in that now. One of the other things, though, that I'm concerned about is that there's been, the Moores mentioned that they've also filed an appeal with the Regional Mass DEP office regarding the order of conditions issued by the Conservation Commission. And since we don't make our decisions on a property until it's cleared, the order of conditions has cleared, I'm unsure where this puts us with that potentially outstanding issue. And would seek counsel on that.
Rebecca, you want to go ahead and comment?
Yes, I just wanted to say that unfortunately, the board of almost all of our decisions are based on speculative data. All data is speculative, guidelines are speculative. There is no way that you can predict prior to a project without using speculative data to the best of our ability. And so unfortunately, I do think that we were not fully informed of the potential size and scope of this project. And I do believe that the abutters deserve, as well as the Board of Health, who's making important decisions that can affect the entire town in a long-term way, that we need to have more information before we can appropriately authorize this sort of project. And I don't think that it would hurt the project to go through a thoughtful process.
I'd like to clear up what I meant by speculative, and that is what the rest of the project will look like is speculative.
Yeah. I think we need to have more information. I'm saying that's in response to the statement that you can't delay the project based on speculative data. I think we have new information from the day that we made our vote. It was not clear to me. It was not clear to Lisa Camp. I don't believe it was clear to the entire board what the size and scope of this project was. It certainly wasn't clear to the abutters. And there are some potential long-term impacts. And the Board of Health is responsible because the DEP will not be regulating the drinking water evaluation in this circumstance.
I think one comment I just want to make is, the appeal hearing isn't a redo of the primary vote. There's a specific standard that we have to satisfy for an appeal. And so it's not a do-over to say, what should we have decided or what could we have decided? It really does require that we say there is new data or there's a different situation or condition that exists since the ruling happened. So it sounds like we're not asserting the third scenario since we're not asserting that site conditions have changed. And again, I think our guidance has been when we talk about a harm, it needs to be a defined harm, not a potential harm. And so we may disagree with that, but that doesn't change what the standard is. And Lisa, I see you've got your hand up as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to correct the record. Like, I think that we do need to be mindful that this is a decision about a single lot in front of us right now. So I don't want my comments to be taken out of context. I'm just saying down the road, we need to be considering the rest of this development as a site. But I think in terms of what's in front of us and the decision we made regarding a well at this particular single property, I don't think that I have heard additional new data regarding that single property and the single proposed well. So I just wanted to correct if there was misinterpretation of my statements. But I guess I just, in the future, if it's really going to be a large single project, I think we need to start considering things in aggregate. And if we need to change our regulations to clarify that, so be it. But I think in terms of this particular appeal for this particular lot and this particular well, I am not sure that I've heard, really new contradictory data presented.
I'd like to also mention that right now for me, the question I have, because I don't think that we've met the appeal requirements, is the order of conditions and where that stands with Mass DEP right now.
So can I just want to make a quick comment on that. I guess 2 points. One is that I sort of agree with Lisa's clarification. I think that's where I was going as well. I think going forward, we need to be aware of this, but I'm not sure I see anything new about this particular lot. I think we always knew it was potentially part of a larger project, but that's a potential and not a reality right now. I think my next question is whether, I think there is a question about the order of conditions, but I don't know that that's part of, I guess I'm asking, is that part of this appeal, or do we address this appeal and then separately sort of decide about whether the order of conditions has been met?
I think it's separate because I think there's a separate agenda item for the status of sort of elements. And I think that would be appropriate for that and is separate from the appeal process unless, we're asserting that that is new data presented, which I think would still then need to demonstrate that there is a real harm, not a speculative harm. So I'd say also for me, I don't think the conditions for an appeal have been met as it relates to the 53 Farm Road parcel.
Thanks, Matt. That was my sense as well. And I guess my preference would be to deal with the order of conditions separately from the appeal question.
And Ellen, have you ever been through anything before that the Board of Health had approved and issued permits for something that then there was an appeal on the order of conditions that were integrated into our approval the first time around?
No, I've never heard.
Can you please clarify? So the well is drilled, so that's sort of done. What is the appeal to? And what are we voting on?
So I think right now what we're voting on is to say, has the requirement for an appeal been met? And
to what? What is the appeal specifically? Appeal?
It's to the combined septic and well permit. And so the combined permit that we voted on. So I think one could vote and say, hey, we think the appeal has been met, and then say, what's the action that then takes? Or one would say, I don't think the criteria for appeal is then met, in which case the previous vote of the board on November 3rd stands.
Do you feel, Matt and the remaining members of the board, that the information proposed on the septic systems for this proposed project were thoroughly provided to us?
My personal opinion is I think the application for this was complete in terms of the specific parcel. I think the larger project questions are sort of separate in scope for me as it relates to whether or not the conditions of appeal. And so for me, I think it hasn't met the new data standard, because I do think the potential of a project is there. And I think to Marion's earlier point, I can't remember what the name of the meeting is, but having kind of read through all the bylaws for the zoning board, the planning board, and the Board of Health as it relates to these questions, it seems clear that the intent there is to provide an opportunity for dialogue. I would again encourage all of us collectively to do everything that's possible in public, because I think public hearings and transparency are one of our most important tasks, even if they're not strictly required. But having said that, for me, it hasn't hit the new data presented threshold, and beyond that, I don't see a kind of experienced harm to the moors. I see a speculative harm, which also doesn't meet the standard. So I'm sort of doesn't meet the requirement on two fronts for me, at least.
Do you feel, because I feel that the septic system is significant in influencing the potential Board of Health considerations. And it has not been clearly presented to us. So
but the septic system,
clearly, may I just finish my sentence? Do you
Sure.
feel that the order of conditions will be adequate to clarify some of these issues? Or do you think that it's tied to the permitting?
So for my opinion, and again, I haven't navigated this before in terms of the DEP appeal, is that, again, we have granted the permits. So this is the question of whether we roll back that because we say something substantially different has happened. If we don't, it doesn't mean that anything's necessarily different. And I do think that becomes part of what we need to figure out. But I think that's a separate question for me from the appeal, because that has its own judicial process. It's sort of not ours. And so for me, it doesn't change it. And my position would be, we had a septic plan, it had a descriptor, it met the setbacks, it met the soil standards. So I think that for me, the question becomes much more on a project scale about what's happening on another parcel. For 53 as a standalone, I felt like it met the standards for disclosing a description of what it was.
And I would agree with that. I don't feel like there's substantial new information relating to this specific permit we issued. And I also agree that I don't think that there's real harm from this one specific permit that we've issued.
And again, when you sort of say real harm, Matt, I think you're describing this as opposed to speculative harm.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
But everything
and then
for a project, that's the problem.
The outstanding question I have is whether the different condition is that now there's an appeal to the order of conditions. Again, we always require an approved order of conditions before we will consider issuing permits on projects or aspects of projects. And so I'm
I
just
would agree.
unclear.
Oh,
I
sorry.
don't think it's, if not for that, I think that there haven't been any changes. There isn't new data other than, different than what we had at the time that we made the decision.
I guess, Daryl, what we granted was a conditional permit. So from a permitting standpoint, it feels to me like the appeal is pertinent to whether or not that condition has been satisfied, but not necessarily to whether that conditional approval was made. Does that make sense? Like we sort of made,
Try me again on that.
so we made a conditional vote that identified a number of conditions that needed to be satisfied to release the permits, right? And so I think one of those conditions was the order of conditions, which has now been appealed. And so for us, the question of, we granted a conditional permit, that granting may result in the, again, a potential outcome is it may not be released if the condition hasn't been satisfied, but it doesn't make the granting of the permit itself inappropriate because we condition it upon that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with that logic, Matt.
This
I think
is
that makes
what I was asking before, because if we have since it's a conditional approval, we can go through the thoughtful process at the implementation of the order of conditions.
So I think we've granted the approval and we've said, this is the thing that releases it. And the order of conditions is one of them. And so for us, I don't think it's for us to reconsider our approval. Our approval has been granted. It's the release of the approval that's subject to the conditions.
Right. Yeah. So that still stands.
Yes. So
right.
I think
So it's still an approval. It's just conditioned on that moving forward. So basically that the order of conditions will manifest. And if it does, then there's no conflict. Correct?
And Ellen, does that fit in with what you see as how the things flow through the Board of Health office?
I am not following your question. How
So
it flows, if there's an appeal to the order
So
of
in
conditions?
general,
Right, we did.
so. I think can I take a shot at
our approvals
take a shot at this?
conditional?
Sorry. So it sounds like, sorry. So we made it conditioned to an order. We made, the word condition appears too often. We made our approval conditional to an order of conditions. And so that stands. And so the order of conditions has been appealed. So one question is whether that means that we can't release our approval. That's fine. I think that question, I think, is separate from the appeal question. Is that fair? So there's question one, which is, does this meet the standard of an appeal? And I think we should sort of address that first. And then I think we should go to the question of, do we release our approvals, which may or may not be able to do based on the fact that the order of conditions has been appealed. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
and so I guess with that, are we then in a position to vote on whether whether the criteria for an appeal have been met?
I think so.
And so I
Right.
guess
I'm going to labor a point. So Ellen, we have a hearing or not a hearing, we review plans, we give approvals, but we don't move ahead with that unless the order of conditions has been issued formally by the Conservation Commission. And then we release the permits thereafter. If there may be other conditions in the more formal sense of conditions, like a deed recorded, something that needs to be received. But then the tracking of the order of conditions is in the hands of the Conservation Commission, not us. So we're not waiting for anything else to release. So that's the gate that I don't think we have. And I just don't know how it intersects. And I could imagine that maybe it'd have to be retroactive, or maybe there's a presumption that the applicant is undertaking activities, say we approve and the order of conditions is under appeal, and that's at their own risk that they're pursuing it. I don't know. I'm not sure.
But I guess for me, like all that, like none of, not that that's not an important question. I think it's an important question. I think it's on our book of business for tonight. I think that even if that were the case, then there's still no demonstrated harms to the appellant in term, versus a speculative harm. So I think that the order of conditions is really important in part of it, but I think we have to sort of say, have we met the standard to overturn a previous decision, not, what information has sort of come in that may kind of make us wish that we could say, hey, this is a part we want to tweak or that we think needs further adjustment. We certainly, I think, my personal opinion is I think it certainly could impact whether the conditions have been satisfied. I think that is an important discussion. For me, that's separate from kind of the decision to appeal. And I do see Mr. Fenno's and Mr. Salvin's hands up, because we said at the beginning, the structure of this hearing isn't a general public comment. It was for the appellate, which is the more specifically, and for the applicant. And so we're sort of not going to open this up for general discussion tonight.
So Matt, we're not allowed to make a comment on the record because this is.
No, I think we said no.
I mean, I think that we sort of said this is what the structure is, because the scope of this is a very specific piece that is specific to the Moors.
I have a specific comment that's specific to the Moors and the structure of what you've outlined here.
I mean, again, Josh, my position is I don't think so. I think that I'll open it up to the board in general, but again, we've sort of said these are what the ground rules are in terms of how we're going to discuss it. And the technical questions and the merits of the larger project aren't the scope here. It's really
that's not my comment. It's about the new data presented and the situations that the conditions that exist. The third paragraph there.
Josh, just a second. Josh, before you just sort of keep talking and get your comment in, I think we made pretty clear from the beginning that the people who had standing here to talk are the Moors and Mr. Murchison.
Well, we were part of the Moors appeal, and we were part of
the problem is I think we got guidance on that, and I think that because the Moors were the ones that signed the appeal, they sort of have to speak for everyone.
Okay. So we're gonna do the wrong thing on behalf of the
Josh,
so that we can follow a rule that
we 100%.
I just want to go on record.
Josh, we 100% have to follow the rules. Is the answer to that?
No, I understand. So I just want to go on the record again as expressing my frustration that we are going to choose the wrong path, and understand everyone, including both you and Matt, are acknowledging that this is a part of a larger project that is not going to benefit Farm Road or the town of Sherborn, but we're going to push it ahead or allow it to continue because of some spirit of the law, but what you're saying is specific to the law. And if you were practicing medicine, which I know that both of you do, you would not.
Daryl, do you have the ability to mute Josh because he's not been recognized?
Like, again,
I don't like having to do that, but I feel like that's where we are.
Right. And again, I think that in terms of what we can do, we have a process. We need to follow it. We're not going to change it. We're not going to change it because people are upset, though that upset may be totally recognizable and not inappropriate, but like we have a process. It's not negotiable. And this is what the process is.
I'm sorry, but I don't agree. I think that we represent the town. We were elected to represent the town. Our job is to, in the absence of statutory protection, our job is to protect the drinking water and the natural resources of the town. We do have new information. This information was not accurately represented to this board so that all of us were fully informed at the time of the vote. And even though we might be able to get around by saying, sure, we're going to meet it through the order of conditions, I think that we as a board should be respectfully listening to the members of the town, the people who live nearby whose water might be affected. And this is how health decisions are made, is based on information that you're referring to as speculative. You cannot prove it until after people are poisoned, and it's too late. We need to think about it in advance. I'm sorry.
Again,
and Rebecca, we received guidance from town council about how to do this. And it's fortunate that there were not more signatures.
Three of us are MDs.
But Rebecca, in terms of what the rules are,
board, Rebecca, be responsible.
Rebecca, what the
Be
rules are,
respectful.
Rebecca, what the rules are is something that we need to go and we need to get guidance, and then we need to follow that guidance. And so if we say, what's the rule and what's the process, and they give
I'm
us
just
guidance-
asking people to do the right thing, Matt. That's all. And I'm going to be done. I'm just asking people to consider the town's opinion.
Josh,
I think you're an
No,
elected
this is
official,
no, no,
and
no.
that
again, like, we're not going to do this. So the next step is that people are out, like we're going to do the mute, because we need to follow the process. And the process is the more is for the folks who can appeal. They did. That's the situation. So there may be lessons learned there. We can't change that. That's what the rule in the process is. Mr. Murchison had a chance to respond. That's the process. Like, again, I completely understand that you may not be enthusiastic about the outcome, but we're not going to adjudicate that by saying, you know, we're going to kind of do what we want and not follow the process, because we have guidance about what we need to do and we need to follow that. So in terms of the vote for the appeal, does the board feel like there's in a position to vote one way or the other? Or is there additional discussion or questions or clarifications that need to be offered?
I have one other thought. And again, this is where it's too bad we do these things at night and we don't have legal counsel sitting with us. But if it was not for the fact of this appeal, our decision would have stood, even though there is an appeal in front of Mass DEP on the order of conditions. So I don't know if that then allows us to not have to consider it under item 3 here, that different situation or conditions exist. As Matt Beaver said, too many use of the words conditions, of there being an outstanding appeal on that order of conditions. So perhaps we can proceed. We can immediately check with town council tomorrow.
I guess my
Depending on
question,
where the vote may go. So
I guess my question there is that our previous approval was conditional on receiving an order of conditions.
we
And
had
so-
already received it before we gave the approval. We had
Yeah.
already received it.
But I would also say,
We did
unless
not
that-
proceed without it. So that part is done.
I don't know
guess-
that that's a new condition, guys. So
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah, I'm
mean-
not sure that's new is what I'm saying.
yeah, exactly.
Can I
That's,
also just-
No,
can
I
ask-
mean, the appeal is new.
Can I just
Yeah,
ask-
that's not a- being
that's not a
appealed.
condition, is
Sarah,
it?
can I ask a clarifying question of the Moores on that?
Okay.
Brian, was that appeal pursued after the 17th?
You're questioning at what time did we file the appeal with the
Right,
conservation?
so, yep, so if we sort of say, what's the universe of conditions that could be applied or considered pertinent for the basis of the appeal would have needed to occur before the 17th, because you couldn't say I filed the appeal on the 21st, and that's the basis for the appeal I submitted to the Board of Health on the 17th.
No, our new condition was just that no public was at that meeting on 10/28.
No, I'm sorry, the DEP appeal for the order of conditions.
That was filed after this, or concurrent with this appeal.
Was that filed after November 17th?
Was it?
Yes.
Okay, it was.
Okay.
So I think if it was filed after November 17th, we can't consider it as a new condition, since it wouldn't have existed at the time that the appeal was made.
Well,
that make sense,
we're
Sarah?
writing them both concurrently. I mean, there's a lot of paperwork involved and we had to get people organized. So we were preparing both concurrently. That's really.
But again, I would say, like, if you said, like, if a thing that we're considering as part of your appeal was generated after the point in time at which your appeal was submitted, from my standpoint, I don't think we can consider it within the appeal, since it didn't exist when it was made.
No, I think that's exactly what point 3 is about.
But to appeal to point 3, the active appeal would not be about something I'm going to do in the future. It's at the time that I'm making this appeal, this exists. So you couldn't appeal on the 17th that you'd appeal to DEP when you were going to appeal on the 19th, but had not yet appealed. It wasn't a new condition. It wasn't operational.
I think we
Yeah, I mean,
stated we
I don't know.
intended to appeal, and I'll leave it at that. I'm
Fair
sorry.
enough. Thanks so much, Brian.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know from a legal standpoint if that's truly a different condition. That's a, parallel appeal, I would say. But that it's
Okay.
not an underlying condition to the setting, like that we found out, like, oh, in fact, a soil type was different or the underlying groundwater depth was different. Like, I guess that's the way I
Or
would.
that it hadn't met clearance of conservation commission or wetlands regulations. I mean, it
Right,
could.
but right,
I
but
don't mean to belabor this point. I just, I think it's a potential. I don't know that.
you're breaking up, Daryl. Sorry.
I just don't know. Right, it's not the same as some others. I'm hardwired, so I can't do any better than this.
Right, but I guess again, going back to
It's a
that
function of the service.
our approval was conditional or predicated on X. It means that if X has not been adjudicated or decided, then our approval is still pending and not confirmed, correct?
We did not have that conditional. We proceeded with our decision because we already had a fully executed order of conditions.
So I think particularly if the more is filed after the 17th, I don't think that activity before. So I see Brian and I see Rebecca. So Brian, you can go ahead, and then Rebecca. Brian, I think
I'm
you're
sorry,
muted.
thank you. As I mentioned, I wasn't expecting this to get to a vote tonight. As I mentioned before, we had spoken to trying to find a consultant to look at this, someone who was qualified, and just about everyone that we spoke to was conflicted out or didn't want to get involved. I did spend some time reading the soils report, and I was very, very concerned by some of the terms that were used, specifically terms such as in general, and things were within a couple of inches. And when you're dealing with your regulations, it seems that such sweeping generalizations, when they say within a couple of inches of another gauging date, and then you go look at the data, and it's really like more like half a foot off. I don't consider a couple of inches a half a foot, but I'm not a mass soil evaluator, and I can't find one to look at this data. So I was expecting to have some more time to try to get someone to look at that, but I will mention that those things are in his report, and those were the test pits on 55. I don't know if they were within the 53 area or not, but those are right in that report. It's written in there in general and a couple of inches. I don't know many scientists who write in such terms when the regulations are as, prescribed as they are in Sherborn. And thank you for allowing me to add that comment, because I was expecting to have a mass soil evaluator say it, but there you go. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian. I think we've had sort of discussion by the board. Are there further points or clarifications that folks want to seek before we take a vote? Brian, are you hand still up or hand newly up? You're good. Okay. Rebecca, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I still believe that that new information has been presented.
Okay. I am not, I guess, Ellen, for the purposes of a motion, should this be an affirmative motion to overturn the previously granted, or to grant an appeal to the previously granted permit for 53 Farm Road? And then I would say, yes, turn it over. Nay would say, leave it as it stands. Do I have that right?
Yes, that is correct.
So do I have a motion to grant an appeal? Oh, go ahead.
I just have a question.
Can you
Sure.
repeat that?
Do we want to have that vote, or do we want to vote on whether the conditions of an appeal have been met?
I think we want to vote on the conditions of appeal. Thanks, Matt. That's correct. You're right. So do I have?
And sorry again, Matt, but that should probably also be an affirmative motion.
Perfect. So do I have a motion that the conditions of appeal have been met?
So moved.
Oh,
Do I have a
seconded.
second? Perfect, okay. And Daryl, I think you're up.
All right, give me a moment. If not for the outstanding filing of an appeal for the order of conditions, and despite my firm belief that every single member of the Board of Health is dedicated to public health issues and water quality being paramount, in the scope of what we normally do, barring a pandemic, I will say nay.
So Matt Beavers, I think will second the comments about my belief that everyone is dedicated to the public health here. And I think further comments that the process is frustrating, I think could be clearer for all involved. I will also vote nay.
I think I will reluctantly also concur with nay.
I will say that I believe that that there has been new data presented that was not clear at the time of the approval. So my approval is yes, there has been criteria for the appeal.
And Matt Vitale, nay. So 4-1, the criteria for appeal have not been met. Do we want to then move on to the order of conditions? I guess, do we need to clear the appeal hearing and then move on to the order of conditions?
I imagine, I don't think any other topics fall under the appeal hearing, other than I'd like to check with town council tomorrow regarding the order of conditions issue.
Okay. So in terms of the appeal hearing, we can close the appeal hearing and then move to the order, the criteria for the permit.
Thank you, guys.
Excuse me, the conditions placed on the permit.
Okay.
So do we need to vote that out, Daryl? In terms of closing the hearing?
I think we need to vote to authorize, one of us could be made to contact town council to ask how we handle that, or how that does or does not fit into this appeal hearing. They may be separate, or they may be intertwined.
I'm happy to get guidance from town council. So moved.
Seconded.
Okay, any other?
Oh, actually, I have a question here. I do have a question here. Like, what exactly are we
Okay.
asking, right? We just said that this appeal criteria weren't met. Are we asking town council if we can reverse that decision? That's what I think is confusing to me.
Since I feel, my belief is that since we based our ability to move ahead with approving the permits previously, that was because the order of conditions had already been issued. Therefore, we were building on that base. And so does a challenge to that base change what we are doing now, which is reaffirming the vote?
Well, I don't know
So
that
is that
we're
being
not-
shaky
we're
now
not
or
reaffirming
not?
the vote. We're just denying the specific appeal, I think. We're just saying this specific appeal
Yeah.
is standing. And so I think, in my mind, it's still separate from this specific appeal. I think we should still
Okay.
talk to town council about what we do in the situation in which
In
something that we
light
based our
of-
prior approval
and
on was
now
not
it's-
approved.
Okay. Okay.
And so I think it's,
And
I would certainly approve authorizing you or someone to speak to town council about that question, but I still think it's separate from this specific appeal.
And I do see
Okay.
Bob stand up and given
Yes.
it as a participant. Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, Matt, so from a process perspective, I hate to suggest what you should do. It's your call. You're the Board of Health, but you do need to close the appeal hearing. And once you close the appeal hearing, I would like to go to the agenda item, which is all of the conditions that you set when you voted approval of the two permits. And I'd like to go through, as I asked in my email, and you kindly put that on the agenda, I'd like to go through those one by one and understand the standing of them, because I'd like to pick up that permit. And my experience has been that if we don't go through this at the meeting, that it's very difficult to get anything done. And so I'd be grateful if we could go through one by one. What I would suggest, Matt, after you've closed the hearing, is that we go through in the order using your minutes, which tell us exactly what the conditions were that you required of me in order that you will issue the permit. Is that a reasonable suggestion?
What I'd say is I think scope here is for the hearing. Let's close it out. I think we are concordant there, and then the board will kind of do the next steps. So appreciate your thoughts. So do I have a motion to close the appeal hearing?
So moved.
Second,
Perfect.
Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca,
I know, I don't know whether there's any benefit to vote in favor of this. I think that the appeal is legitimate. So I don't think we close the hearing.
I mean, I think there's a vote on.
That's the issues.
Yeah, but I think we voted on that, and I think you voted your opinion on that. And so I think, I mean, it's up to you. If you want to say we can't close the hearing, it's still a vote, right? But I think we voted on the earlier question. The question here is just whether we're going to keep discussing it.
Right.
So you just need to vote about closing the hearing.
Right. So I'll just abstain.
Your choice.
Okay, Matt Vitale, aye. And so I think in terms of, I'm happy to go through and look at the specific conditions, since that's a central question. Daryl, maybe, I don't know, I know that we'd had the specific agenda item that Mr. Murchison had done, but again, I'm happy to go through and kind of say, I do think that the central question I have is around the conservation conditions, order of conditions. And so I'd like to discuss that first, because I think that sort of pivots and is most likely to overlap with the kind of curiosity of the attendees. Does that sound reasonable to folks? Okay, Bob, I'd love for us to be able to sort of start our discussion and then would welcome your input. Does that sound okay to you?
Sure. I guess I thought my comments might inform your discussion, but I'm happy to go later, Matt, if you prefer.
I'd love for us to kind of have at least an initial discussion, just because I think people have a lot of thoughts on it. And then we can circle back. And I think for this portion, this is open for general public comment, because this is not the same situation as it was related to the specific appeal. I think this then reverts to our typical patterns. So if folks have comments, public comment is permitted. Daryl, I think you sort of had articulated this as sort of out of this. I do think this remains an important issue. For me, it wasn't in the appeal hearing, but I think I'd love to kind of get a sense from you of, kind of how we can help articulate the question to town council. And I don't know if you sort of have something in mind, or, if you were thinking of a general motion. Do we want to talk about this issue a little bit more to think through it together in advance of that?
Right, I think it goes to, we we based an approval on an approved order of conditions. And that order of conditions has been appealed. Do we need to wait for the outcome before issuing any permits? Maybe that's the simplest way
Okay.
to state it.
Um,
Embellishments welcomed to that.
But my reaction is that sounds like a good question. Is there other kind of discussion on the specific question for the board? And if not, then we'll let Mr. Murchison comment. And so if hearing nothing else from the board, go ahead, Bob.
Sure. So I guess what I'd like to do is make a comment that you're having a conversation about an appeal that we don't have any idea whether it was properly filed, whether it was timely filed, and I believe it was not timely filed because the appeal period ended a while back, prior to the 18th. So you're speculating on holding a permit because somebody has waved their arms and said they filed something somewhere with the state. And I'm not denigrating Brian. I'm sure he believes he filed an appeal with whoever the right people are. But you don't have that appeal. You have no idea whether it was filed timely. I don't think it was. I'm not going to say it wasn't because I don't know what it was he filed or when he filed it. But what I can tell you is that if he filed in the time period that he says he filed it, it was not timely filed because I was not allowed to record the order of conditions until the appeal period had passed. That was a requirement of the Sherborn Conservation Commission. The day after the appeal period passed, I recorded it and I forwarded it to you immediately. And so I don't believe that a timely appeal has been filed. And so I think it's much ado about nothing. I would also point you to, so you have now upheld my permits, and my permit is conditional to receipt of a written order of conditions from the Conservation Commission prior to release of the approved soil absorption system plan. Okay, I have met that condition. You have receipt of a written order of conditions. Furthermore, I recorded it as is required by the Conservation Commission. Your motion your condition in your motion to grant me the permits doesn't even say I had to record it. I have in fact recorded it outside of their appeal period. So I think I am perfectly in compliance with not only Concom's rules, but with the condition that you voted on November the 3rd. And that's what I have to say on that topic. I'll take questions if you have them.
Thanks, Bob. Brian, I see your hand up as well. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. I consulted with both the Northeast Regional Office and with the Conservation Commission of the town and with the agent of the town as to the appropriate date to use to calculate when the appeal of the order of conditions was due, and we postmarked it on the date as prescribed by Mass DEP. So it was filed in a timely fashion. It was co-filed with Bob. We sent him a copy, green card, return receipt requested. So he will receive a copy, as will the Conservation Commission. And we have no problem sharing with the Board of Health, but I didn't feel as though it really was going to be germane during our discussion today. I didn't realize we were going to get this far during this conversation tonight. I thought we'd still be working on the appeal into the next meeting. So that's, I guess, pox on me, but it was filed timely. It's my understanding, and that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Brian.
And that's part of the question that I have for town council, because Right, we wait until the appeal period has passed. So our calculations of that appeal period being done differently by different groups. And we need some resolution of that as well.
And so I guess there are one of two questions that we could be asking town council. One of them is a fact-based question of what was the timely filing deadline, and did the appeal satisfy that? Sort of one question, which would then depend on sort of the facts of, you know, what was the filing date, and is it a postmark date, or kind of whatever those parts are. And then there's a second question, which is procedurally, given a report of an outstanding appeal, what is proper for us to do in terms of responding to that status? And sort of, I guess in that case, if town council said, you know, you sort of had it conditional to the Sherborn, you know, this was conditional to the Sherborn Conservation Commission, they satisfied that condition. It may have additional appeals and that may have additional consequences, but the condition you had was met. You know, and that could then proceed. I mean, that seems like a question that could be put to town council to then sort of answer for proper procedure in terms of dealing with the situation with which we have not previously dealt. And so I guess we probably have both questions then, don't we?
Yes.
Because if it's not timely, the procedure's moot. If it is timely, then the procedure is pertinent. Okay.
Yes. Okay, so
any other discussion?
I lost track whether we voted on contacting town council already or not.
You have to vote.
Okay, we did not. Okay.
I think we did not. I think recognizing sort of Mr. Murchison, I think has kind of one understanding. Mr. Moore has a different. I think it's prudent for us to seek guidance of council. So I would move that we seek town council guidance for the questions described.
Do you want to authorize the chair and or the vice chair like you did before, or just the chair?
I think either or is fine.
Do we need to reauthorize it since we already authorized, like?
No, that was on open meeting law.
Oh, okay.
Complaint.
Okay.
All right. So I will second it with the and or vice chair, chair and or vice chair.
Matt, may I speak?
Oh, sure, Bob.
No, we're in the middle of
I
voting.
think we can make a vote, right?
Yes.
I mean, I think we're voting for getting guidance from town council. I think, Bob, we can offer a clarifying comment after that. Daryl, go ahead.
I think I moved it. Somebody needs to second.
Second.
Any other comments from the board? Daryl, aye.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, aye.
Can you please clarify exactly what we're voting on?
Authorizing the chair and or vice chair to work with town council to resolve this order of conditions appeal issue.
I would also like to talk to the town council.
I don't think
we can have a quorum.
Yeah, that was my understanding as well.
With them.
We don't have to talk at the same time.
We can't talk on the same topic, and I don't want to be real close to that line. I mean, I am certainly not attached to sort of doing it, but I think I strongly think we can't have more than 2 members of the board in that conversation.
Also, so Rebecca, if you'd like, write out if you have a different angle on this question or your interpretation of the question, write it out, and we will provide it to town council at the same time that we provide or talk to them.
Okay, that'd be great. Thanks.
But we're going to be doing that tomorrow, so you need to get it to us tomorrow morning, first thing.
You know what time?
I don't know what time, but as soon as possible, like 9 a.m.
So So I think we still need a vote from Rebecca.
Yes. I vote yes.
And then Matt Vitale, aye. And then Bob, go ahead with your comment.
Yeah, so my comment is that I don't object to your seeking counsel. I always think that's a good idea because I absolutely believe that you should follow the rule of law. What I do have concern about is that there was a condition put on this vote 4 weeks ago to get guidance from town council, and it is 4 weeks later and it has not happened. And that it's very, very difficult to work under these circumstances where a condition of town council drags on for 4 weeks. My attorney writes multiple emails that go without reply. And I just want to ask that we have a process here that is fair to the applicant and timely. And so I would beg of you, please get your counsel, but please do it.
Fair enough, Bob. I'd say from my standpoint, I think that's a mischaracterization of facts, but also recognize we may have different points of view there. But again, I would say I certainly, I think we'll work hard to get a timely response to you and to Jim. Do we want to move on to the next set of conditions? Any objections from the board?
The next set of, as in the status of approvals for 53
Yep.
Farm Road, that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely.
And so maybe the next easiest one to tackle is the wellhead protection. And so Bob, I remember I asked this of you, but I can't remember what you said. Is your intent that the sort of excerpt that you provided digitally constitutes a plan, or is that just saying, is this what you guys had in mind?
No, it constituted a plan submitted for approval.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say from my standpoint, I thought I'd made it clear in the meeting. I think my intent is to have a complete plan so that we can kind of say this is the gold standard piece that reflects what we're doing on this property, and not kind of here's a piece in isolation. But again, that might just be my opinion. I'll sort of look to others on the board about sort of how you feel about this piece in isolation.
Well, one of the things, Matt, that's happened through the over the course of this process is that when you ask for these things and we change them and then there are multiple plans, everybody complains that there are multiple plans. So I thought in this case, I would give you the snapshot so it didn't cause yet another plan to be produced. If you'd like, if you all as a board are comfortable with what this drawing shows, I can certainly have Deshang change the drawing and send it to you. I don't object to that, but there was a lot of complaint about the number of different plans, and I was through this process trying to improve that.
Although I mean, I think that we always had this condition though, so this isn't something, you know, that was extemporaneous, that we said, hey, you need to put some protection on your well due to the proximity to a driveway and the potential for, you know, cars to, you know, maybe knock into the well, et cetera. I mean, that's always been a requirement. So it's not like we were coming up with new conditions. That always was a condition. And I think the location of the well and the proximity to the driveway, you know, that's something that sort of, I thought, changed over time. So that's why it might have seemed like additional iterations, but I personally like to have a plan that's comprehensive and includes all of the requirements.
That's totally fair, Lisa, but could I ask that you guys give me the green light that if I put this on a plan, you're good with it? In other words, there's no reason.
I would say from my standpoint, Bob, looking at what you described here, again, I'd want to see it on the plan just to make sure it's clear, but you know, to kind of demarcate the existing driveways unmoved, since the last set of plans submitted included both the driveway moving and not moving. I'd want to have it kind of clearly reflected. This is exactly where the driveway is relative to the well, because I think that's now fixed since you dug the well, and you know that it all seems reasonable. And I think a sort of 3-foot diameter boulder is marked. You know, to me that sort of lines it up. The last set of plans we had both possibilities for the driveway listed, so I'd like to just see, you know, this last plan to say, yep, this is exactly what's happening, as opposed to this sort of conditionals in there. But conceptually, like if this is what appears on the plan, it would pass muster for me.
Great. I appreciate that. I did, as you know, request that you just give me an example of a couple of that been done in the past so that I could see what worked for you guys. I also asked for an example for form so I could do the proper deed recording that you want, because I don't know what you want the deed recording to say. And I'm assuming that because this part of the regulation has been used previously, that there are deed recordings that you could easily point me to so I could get it right the first time. But I've gotten no reply to those emails.
Okay.
That is because your request, as you made it, is a very complicated one, because there is no way to record features that are on plans in a easily searchable manner. So we've searched our memories, and the next step is to search all the files to find out where there was protection added to a well. Hasn't happened often because it's a relatively new addition. Previously, people had to just move their well or move the driveway. So it was an accommodation to try to make things easier for residents in town. So there aren't a lot of examples, and it's very difficult to find. You requested all, I believe. So what people have done in the past, it says generally do just what you're doing here. Here's the general layout. Here are my thoughts. I'll finish. Here are my thoughts. I'm saying not mine, but yours, on how to protect the wellhead. And the board takes a look at it and says, yeah, go ahead. And I agree with everyone else that it then is best if it's formally added to the plan. Otherwise, it looks like maybe these are just notes from some people speculating on what they might do, or you never know. Sketches added. So formalizing it is always a great idea. And I've had to work in industrial settings on protections, and sometimes you look at what is the curve of the roadway and what is the lay of the land there to determine if that's adequate. So if I was protecting some chemical tanks, I'd probably have more protections from all the angles that a vehicle going out of control could potentially approach that thing that you're trying to protect. But maybe in this case, there's some balance to be struck, because it is the owner's well. Hopefully they don't want it damaged either. If some damage occurs because there's not sufficient protection, then the burden will fall on the owner. We just want to try to avoid that happening, because sometimes there's damage done where, for example, if something hits the pipe that's coming up out of the ground and shifts it, it still functions and it still works, but the soil has been pulled away from the pipe on one side, or the seal around the top has been broken, and now you have a conduit for surface waters to flow down the outside of the pipe and maybe bring contaminants with it. So that would be one thing, is whether you wanted to have more protections from those other angles, say directly above and maybe slightly at around noon and at around 4 or 5 o'clock. But the board can discuss, like, how far do we need to go, or do we let it be somewhat discretionary on the part of the applicant? And then the other is specifying a 3-foot diameter boulder. Does that have to be a perfect circle? Could be 2 feet high and 3 feet or 5 feet long. I would try to word it so there's a little more flexibility that you could meet. I don't know if you already have such a boulder, or if it would become very limiting to try to find a 3-foot diameter boulder. So that would be my other comment.
Thank you, Daryl. Let me just make one comment. I understand you didn't, you couldn't easily get the example to share with me, which I was hoping for, because I thought that would help. But in that case, just simply answering the email and saying that would have been really great. Instead, I went 3 weeks without reply, and it didn't feel good.
Bob, I guess the question I have is I'd really love to figure out how to move forward. So in terms of the guidance you need from the board for the plan, it sounds like we've said we'd like to see it on the plan. In terms of, I guess for the board, do we, from my standpoint, I think I don't know that I'm trying to get like a fortress for the well, but just sort of a place to make sure that somebody doesn't think this is a good place to put the snow. And as the Amazon trucks have hit my light post on my driveway about 15 times now, something that makes sure that nobody's apt to hit the well, which with this area, Bob, my recollection is this is sort of next to a hillside. So nobody's going to be turning around here with sort of how it's structured. Am I picturing the lot correctly?
You're absolutely correct. And Matt, if you want 3 boulders, I'll give you 3. Just tell me all I want to know is what you want.
Yep. And so I guess for kind of Daryl, to your question, I think for me, this doesn't feel like a high turnaround risk for other pieces. And I think, a sort of car careening off the driveway could also go 20 feet. And so, figure out a little bit how to be practical. I think for me, I'm okay with one run. But if others feel strongly about the need for more, I'm sort of not opposed, particularly if Mr. Murchison isn't.
As I said, if I was protecting a hazardous chemical tank, I'd feel very differently.
Yeah.
I would have more. I'd have one for the vehicle sliding on an icy surface off and coming down from the north, if this is oriented towards the north. So, but that's my background, so therefore that's what I know. But the one boulder, as long as it's of sufficient size, I don't know that I care whether it's a 3-foot diameter sphere. But this looks reasonable in terms of plowing damage. And
Okay.
as you said, turnaround.
And so if Mr. Murchison put something, I mean, again, I think, when we're describing a boulder, maybe perhaps we could say a minimum diameter to say it must be at least 3 feet in diameter, and that, that then gives some flexibility for them to come up with the practical solution. I mean, if their septic system is anything like mine, I suspect they'll have boulders aplenty, but, give some flexibility there. Any other comments from the board?
I will also mention things that other people have done is putting in granite posts. Smaller than a boulder. But again, if you have abundant boulders available, you might want to use them up.
Okay, so it sounds like the materials provided on an updated plan. And I think, Bob, I think it's clear, but again, I really want you to be able to get to a final plan. For me, the part that was most challenging about the last plan was it was conditional with what would happen with the driveway. So I think the 2 updates for me are that the driveway is reflected in the position it will be in, and then this piece, and those 2 things connect together. But it sounds like that'll kind of pass the check for the board.
I'm happy to do that, but just to clarify, you do want me to issue an entire new plan, correct?
I would say my goal is to say, I think what I want in the file to be complete and comprehensive and sort of reflect it. So that would be the ask that I had. My understanding from what you said earlier is that you had no objection to having Deshane do that.
Yeah,
And
that's
hold on,
correct.
so another approach, and Mark, perhaps you could weigh in, is this something that is typically provided at the as-built stage?
Well, it could be,
So
and
that
I suggest it does get placed on the as-built as well. So, that's the other part to it, because it's part of this whole plan. So yes, it would also have to be reflected on the as-built. And I would suggest when it says 3-foot diameter, as you noted, note the size of it as well. How high is this boulder? Is it 1 foot high or 5 feet high? We should know the dimensions of the boulder, or if the engineer works with Bob and decides that granite posts might look better and be better, that's between them, but then they could indicate the size of those granite posts as well.
Okay.
And
I
there's
thought-
one other question that Bob had about the deed recording. So since we've only had seriously a couple of these before, what this situation highlighted is that the person arranging for the wellhead protection is not the same person who will, I presume, be living at the property in the future. So it raised awareness for us that there needs to be a way to communicate the importance of the big rock that might be there or whatever else, and why is it there? And that hasn't been the case before. So this would be a new thing, is to have a deed recording that just states that, you know, the bollards, the granite posts, the rocks, the stone wall, whatever it is that gets placed there for protection is there for well protection, and it's not meant to be moved.
Would it be adequate to just say that there must be well protection?
Or that the well protection must remain in place unless another plan for well protection is approved by the board.
Something like that, just
Yeah.
so that we don't say you have to keep the same boulder there for the next 1,000 years.
Yeah, yeah.
And then that
Okay.
hopefully gives Bob some flexibility to like just say, you know, it gives him flexibility, basically.
Right. And this came out of, well, one, it was an accommodation to ease up on that setback restriction, give people some flexibility on how they implement it, but also to protect against those unrecognized impacts to wellheads that have occurred in town and caused
So I think
increased bacteria counts in the water because things were running down from the surface that shouldn't have been.
So it sounds like we have quite thoroughly beat the dead horse of the well protection. If there's no other comments, Bob, do you feel like you've got the information for the next step so we can continue discussing the other outstanding issues?
So I'm a little unclear, Matt. Are you all right with me providing all of this at the end as part of the final approval of the well and the as-built, or do I need to give it to you at this time in order to get my septic permit, which obviously has nothing to do with this, but.
I would say from my position, I'm fine with it being as-built, so the plans are just updated once. I think we've sort of given clear guidance about what the expectations are.
Great.
And I just, does that pass the gut check for other folks?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
That's why I wanted
Yeah, I
it
think
on
that's
the
fine.
as-built. No need to keep, you know, making small changes to plans. Captured and built.
Is that acceptable for you, Bob?
Perfect, yes.
Okay.
So you will not require it in order to issue the septic permit, but you will require it in order for, you know, a certificate of occupancy and a final well approval for the house.
Correct.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you.
And I think garbage grinder deed recording has been satisfied. Any discussion there from either Bob or the board? I think that was included in the materials. Perfect.
I have no comment.
Perfect. I'm
No,
enthusiastic about the lack of a garbage disposal. And then in terms of the guidance from town council on EHR applicability,
that's not an issue yet.
okay.
And we've been very busy with town council on other matters, such as other matters that you're aware of.
And so I guess the question then is, you know, is this condition satisfied or it's not satisfied at this time from your standpoint, Daryl?
Is this condition, what condition are you referring to?
So I think it was conditional on seeking guidance from town council on the EHIR applicability. So it doesn't necessarily say that town council has reached a specific conclusion, but I think that it's been sought. Daryl, I can't tell if you're poor connection or mulling.
Okay, sorry, I'm moving that thing about. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. I think all right, so we haven't had that discussion, but I think from what we have discussed earlier this evening, my opinion is that it's not conditional to that at the moment.
And then Rebecca, I see you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, could you make that of his full statements? You don't consider that is related to that. So what exactly are you saying, Daryl? I want to make sure I understand what you're saying.
Okay, regarding, we were going to speak with town council. I frankly don't even remember exactly. I'd have to go back and listen to where the EHIR discussion was coming in, but I don't think it was on this property, was it?
Yes, Daryl, would you like me to read the condition that was voted on November 3rd? I'd be happy to refresh your memory.
That'd be fantastic.
Okay, so the condition that was voted on November 3rd for me to get the septic permit from you all was conditional to, and now I quote, guidance from town council and or the planning board on if the lots can be looked at individually or whether they should be looked at in the context of an interconnected overall project, i.e. whether or not an EHIR should be required, and
I would like to make a comment.
Sure, Rebecca, fire away.
Please do.
In the context of an EHIR and the bigger context of this order of conditions, and in reference to some statements that were made earlier today, which was whether or not these should be considered as independent parcels and that we're only voting on this one tonight, or whether the fact that we now know that this adjacent parcel has the potential to create a large project in conglomerate added together. Within the last 5 years, and I need to find out what when it was exactly, and I'd be happy to provide a reference. At the state level, the Department of Environmental Protection, with regard to drinking water protection and drinking water standards and drinking water evaluation and public water supplies. So we're talking about private water supplies here. We're lacking statutory protection in Sherborn, which is the reason that this is a big debate. Because if it were in Wellesley or Natick, the developer, Mr. Murchison, would have to meet state guidelines for protecting drinking water. And it's our responsibility as a board to make that happen, and we all know that. But they recently had an update to the state regulations, which was that when it was clear that more than one parcels which are adjacent would eventually result in a project of a greater magnitude than is apparent at the time of an individual parcel, because there's been evidence of multiple projects presented piecemeal and then end up adding up to a large project. Some changes were made at the state level allowing, when this became apparent, so in our case, it just became apparent to us that we would have the authority to reevaluate the entire project once it becomes apparent that it is not, in fact, a single family house on a single lot, and that it could potentially be a larger project, in which case many of the drinking water and environmental protection evaluation processes would have an impact of a greater magnitude. And so I believe that we would be in keeping with state regulations if we were to consider this as a bigger project, and to consider it together as one large project. And I think that this is a tactic that has been tried in the past by many different individuals. And I think we need to be aware of that. And there are state laws that are supporting the need to consider this in the bigger context. So I believe there are some state regulations that are in support of this effort. It's not that I'm trying to slow you down, Mr. Murchison, but we need in Sherborn, where we don't have sewer infrastructure. And there are 100% private wells, which are not protected by drinking water laws. We need to think about these things in the big picture. And I think it's very difficult as a Board of Health to have to do this. And so I think that we should investigate this before we authorize anything. And I don't know how to include it, but I think it should be included in the order of conditions. That this is potentially, in addition to the adjacent project, a large project, and there are different considerations that should be met. And I think we need to not consider this as an individual project.
So I think, again, the condition is sort of imposed in our vote of the 3rd. I think for me, my impression is
we didn't know that it was a big project. We thought it was a single family house on a single lot. That was the impression.
I think it's pretty clear from our condition that we wondered whether it was part of a bigger project. So the question for me is, did we ever seek advice from council on that topic?
Right. Which is why.
And I think kind of more specifically, like, is the issue resolved? And what I would say is, I don't know that the EHIR issue is resolved in the context of 65 Farm, in part because we haven't received that application yet. And so being able to say, does this or does it not, in the context of a speculative proposal that was sort of
this tactic works. I mean, it works because.
Well, but again, I would say, like, I don't think town council can say, hey, does this qualify to the EHIR when we haven't received the other part of the project? Like,
well, that's true, but that's why updates are made at the state level, which is why I think we should investigate. And I think it should be included in our order of conditions for the benefit.
Right. So I guess the question then becomes, like, I think, we put conditions in place, and now we need to say, has the condition been satisfied or not? I think my question is, like, I think guidance is ongoing, and I don't think it's been resolved. And so, how does one handle that since the issue remains unresolved? And certainly Mr. Murchison and his council have reached out to town council as well. But the granting of the permit was on seeking guidance, and does the HIR apply? If Mr. Murchison didn't submit his 65 farm parcel for 6 months, for example, does that then say, our expectation is that this kind of remains in a durably unresolved state? Or do we say, is this likely or unlikely to be applied to the EHIR, and how we handle that? So I think our condition was that we need to seek guidance. It doesn't necessarily say that town council has to provide a determination to it.
I know that there have been changes made recently at the state level because of this problem. And so it might be worth investigating. That's all I would say.
Thanks, Rebecca. Other comments from the board, or if they're, I know this is, I think, a key part of the concerns that abutters have raised as it relates to the context of the whole project. So I think if folks have comments that they'd like on the record now, would certainly be an appropriate time to provide them, as this is kind of the scope that's potentially larger. Go ahead, Mr. Moore.
Thank you for recognizing me again. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the wetlands, one of the issues for the appeal of the order of conditions was based on the fact that we believe, our contention is that the septic loading that was planned for the overall large project runs afoul of a couple different parts of Title V, and an EHIR should have been done as part of the entire project. So it's not just recent regulatory wins or whatever Rebecca was referring to, but there is actually existing code in the I can't remember if it's Title V or the Wetlands Protection Act, that says if you are doing a project, even if it's in phases, that it should be considered as a whole. So there's at least, I believe, 2 different state laws which consider the situation that we're up against right now, where we're looking at 9 individual projects being permitted separately, with the tipping their hat towards treating it as one. And that's my impression. Of course, I'm I'm an opponent, so I'm sure Mr. Murchison and his attorney will offer a different opinion, but that's what we read into the Wetlands Protection Act and into Title V.
And so I guess the question before the board is sort of, if the EHIR question is unresolved at this time, what's kind of the most reasonable way to proceed? Do we anticipate that that issue will be resolved by the meeting on December 15th? And we'd say, we sort of satisfied 3 conditions. We've got resolution we need to seek with conservation, with the order of conditions appeal. We need council guidance. That sounds like we should be able to get that in a timely fashion. We need to get resolution on the EHIR question. Again, I think for me, it's a question specifically as it relates to 53. My own opinion is probably not what's relevant here, but sort of how do we get to that resolution? Because I
think it's worth revisiting with town council on, is this something, as you point out, can we address this by the next meeting with them?
I think
again, the resources on this have been diverted to other
and I think
more urgent demands in terms of deadlines for public records requests and the like. So
I do think it's fair for the applicant to be, to be able to say, sort of one way or another, we kind of need to arrive at a resolution so that.
Right. So we can perhaps, if we can't get guidance from town council by next meeting, maybe we'll have to deliberate on this as a board without the benefit of guidance from council.
So is that my understanding then that we have not received any guidance from council on this since the meeting in which we asked for it?
No, we have not, because it's been a very busy period.
I don't need to know why. I just want to make it clear that we haven't discussed it. That's all. Okay.
So I think the questions have been put to council. I think there's sort of it's sort of an unresolved issue. So I think for the question of has it been put to council, I think the question has been. I think that the answer to that is not yet resolved. Does that answer your question, Matt?
Yeah, that does answer my question. So then I guess the question is, do we need to resolve this, or is there a way for us to sort of reserve the right to include this in any evaluation of a future project, or like how do we proceed there? Because it's a little, I sort of see how this could be part of a larger project, but I also worry about setting a precedent where we say, well, anything that happens, we reserve the right to at any point in the future reconsider. And so I'm just trying to understand how we put some reasonable limits on this.
I agree. I think, my own position is, I think that we want to get it right and we want to be thoughtful for all the issues that folks have raised. I think at the same time, we need to get a timely resolution for Mr. Murchison in terms of satisfying the condition. And so I think that saying, one way or the other, this needs to be decided by the 15th. And my hope is that we can get that fully resolved with town council and with the inputs of any other kind of pertinent local stakeholders to say, here's how we'll treat it in regards to it. And it may be to say, we don't have a 65 parcel. And so, we can only, because I think the reality is for the purposes of 53, it is what it is. And so Mr. Murchison has had a initial discussion with a variety of boards, and that may substantially resemble the project he ultimately puts forward. But I think that at the same time, for me, the sort of nature of projectness, it feels different to say we've got something that's sort of fully here. If we're saying we can't decide because you haven't done the other thing, that seems like we're adding a new condition that wasn't the intent of the original, which is really to say, how does this potentially fit in? And that's it does or it doesn't resolution, as opposed to we can't know because we don't have the full plan.
Right.
And I think, again, I'd like to, same thing that you said, same thing that I said earlier, see if we can get guidance between now and the 15th. And if not, then we'll move on to Plan B on
Okay.
trying to resolve this.
Okay.
Chairman, may I speak?
Yep.
Chairperson, chair, yes, go ahead.
I got my mask on too, Daryl. It's all good.
Go ahead, Bob.
I just wasn't sure who you thought you were, if you were talking to Matt
Well,
or to me.
It appears that Matt actually has been chairing the meeting. So yes, I was intending to speak to Matt since he was really been chairing this entire meeting. So there are two comments I'd like to make. First of all, I think it's reasonable for me to have assumed when you approved these permits 4 weeks ago, that it would not take 4 weeks, and now you're talking about 6 weeks to simply get guidance from town council. And I just don't think that makes sense. The second point I would make for this board and also for all the public who are present, I'd like to read the title of section 3, which the EHIR, which is what you're discussing, applying to this project, okay, the 53 Farm Road. The title is Public and Environmental Health Review Regulations and Standards for Other than a Single Family Dwelling on a Single Lot. And the reason that you titled it that when you wrote the regulation was you meant to be very clear that it doesn't apply to a single family dwelling on a single lot. And that's because you have very onerous setbacks that are required for a single family home on a single family lot. And so it wouldn't make any sense to have section 3 be applied to it. The other point I would make is that there have been two other very similar situations. Green Lane, 5 single family homes on single family lots, all contiguous with one another. The total septage on that project was close to 3,000 gallons per day, well in excess of your limit of 2,000 to cause an EHIR.
That was before the bylaw was passed.
What?
The bylaw was in 2019.
No, absolutely not.
There was an update that changed
title
the
is not-
thresholds, Bob.
But the criteria, Bob, was what was updated in 2019. So your descriptions from 2017 would then have not been under the actionable bylaw.
That title existed for many, many, many years.
Again, what we're describing is the bylaw and the conditions that are delineated. And so again, I'm not describing the section of the section header. What I'm describing is what constitutes a project was the bylaw revision that went in place in 2019. So again, I think this is fine fruit for future discussion, but the 2006 and 2017 examples are not under the current bylaw.
But what I'm saying, Matt, is that you had 4 weeks to get guidance from.
But Bob, I'm honestly not going to re-adjudicate this. I think you made your position clear. I think we're trying, you asked the question, have my conditions been met? I think that many of your conditions have been met. This one hasn't. And so what we're talking about is the next steps. I fully understand that you would like to see something different. I think you made that clear.
I'd like to see a fair process, Matt. That's what I'd like to see. A
100%, Bob.
rules-based process. That's what I'd like.
Absolutely. And so we set a condition. It hasn't been satisfied. We'll continue to work to do so. I appreciate your positions, Bob, and you made it clear. So it sounds like we've got next steps for the resolution is work to resolve the EHIR applicability to 53 Farm Road, achieve that resolution in advance of the 12:15 meeting. If it can be resolved earlier via guidance from council, great. We'll go from there. Does that sound right to the rest of the board?
Yes.
Yeah.
Bob, I believe those were the conditions that you sought clarification of. Is that correct? We got garbage grinder, we got HIR, we got wellhead protection, and then we discussed the Conservation Commission order of conditions.
Correct.
Rebecca, go ahead, and then Bob, go ahead.
This is not related to this case, but in response to Bob's comment, there also has already been evidence of a potential contamination of one of the neighboring wells on Green Lane. So I think that's a bad example for you to bring up.
All right, Bob, go ahead.
I don't have anything further. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right, so I think we've addressed the 53 Farm Road questions, unless there are any other questions from any of the butters there. Daryl, given the overlap, I don't know if you want to provide, I think we've got an agenda item for providing clarification on the 65 farm comments. Do you want to segue into that topic given the overlap?
So there was an outstanding question. Excuse me a minute, I need to pull up an email. All right. So at the October 28th pre-application conference that the planning board held, where the possible development of 65 Farm Road was discussed. The, excuse me. The general purpose of that was for the applicant or the potential applicant to share ideas about what might be done with that land. And at that meeting, they were soliciting input from the attendees about specific regulatory issues that might be had, but then there were also questions or requests for input to make the project more resilient, or any other ideas that there were about it. And connected with that, I raised a couple of issues that I said, one I said was just a personal opinion, and then the other two I said were not necessarily items that were regulated by the Board of Health, but in terms of making, again, making more resilient at the state level for shared systems of a certain size. But it's a concern whenever there's a shared system and different users of the systems are not formally connected. The state had seen that there were problems with financing, repairs, and upkeep of the systems. And I think Bob basically asked, well, what did that entail? I suggested that the state had regulations regard now as a result of seeing the problems in the past and how systems might perform poorly for a length of time while the contributing parties were arguing about how to resolve a situation. So they said that they had set up rules about what needed to be done, how funds were to be set aside, escrow accounts, other mechanism for doing that. And so there was a request for some information about that. I provided a regulatory citation. It was then suggested that I was contemplating that the Board of Health was going to implement that regulation, but that is not our regulation to implement. It's not the right circumstance. It was merely offered as an example of mechanisms that could be set up for the shared system that was suggested at that meeting. So Bob, does that answer your question on why you've received the information on the CMR regulation?
Yeah, just to clarify, so it referenced privately owned wastewater treatment facilities, which clearly what I am contemplating is nothing like a privately owned wastewater treatment facility.
And
So
at no point did I suggest that it
could I-
was.
Could I finish, please? I'm speaking now, Daryl, please. And so I just wanted to clarify that this was not an applicable regulation. I mean, it's just completely out of the scope of what I was talking about. And I asked for clarification that it was in fact not relevant. And that's when the email, you refused to answer the email, and that's what got us here tonight.
Bob, again, just to correct that, I think what I actually said is, Bob, I totally hear that you'd like to address this. I think having this meeting in a public forum so that community members can see and have it be transparent is the most appropriate venue. Is that along the lines of what I communicated?
That is what you communicated. That's correct.
Yep.
However, I don't think it results, Matt, in a good regulatory process when people.
Totally fine. But again, I think that's different than you didn't reply. I think what I actually said was, I think we need to have this so that members of the community can see it, hear it, and participate and have it be transparent. And
Well,
that's
actually,
not the same
it was
as
10 days. It was 10 days without reply, and then I sent an email, and then you did answer. That's correct. I agree.
Okay. And so it sounds like.
And I would like to add further clarification. At the meeting of the 28th, I said it was an example of how things were done as an idea to make your project, possible project, more resilient. So it was not intended. I never said it was our regulation. I never said it was directly applicable, but it could be useful since you were requesting input and ideas. You were asking for ideas, not just regulatory requirements. And then
Carol, is it fair to say that
your
what you
first
tried-
email request was replied to, and it indicated that. And then, right, you indicated to Matt in an email that I was contemplating making this a health requirement, and at no time did I say anything remotely like that.
So I would, given the late hour, I'd sort of love for us to not go back and forth. Daryl, what I'm hearing from you is you provide an illustrative example in the context of the intent of that meeting. And so, that was kind of the point, is to say, what makes this project better and closer to what we think is best practice. What you provided was an illustration as opposed to a prediction. And then to Mr. Murchison's point, I think we see differently the communication he got, from my standpoint, there was a response. But is that fair to say, Gerald, that you provided sort of an illustrative example?
Absolutely.
Perfect. And so I'd love to kind of then say, have we kind of checked the box for this topic? And then I guess my other question is Bob, is 65 something that's going to be ready for the agenda for December 15th, or is that something that's going to be coming at a later time?
I don't know what you mean when you say 65, Matt.
So I think that you have a parcel of land at 65 Farm Road. I think there was an email communication. There was sort of a battery of emails. And so one of them was, I think, your open space subdivision. You were, I think, in one of the follow-up emails regarding Daryl's illustrative example that you mentioned, that you sort of would then proceed with submitting some set of project proposals, but I don't remember the details of that.
Yeah, I honestly don't know, given the tone and the tenor of this meeting and the EHIR swirling, continuing to kick the can down the road discussion. I don't know, and I'm not being disingenuous. I don't know what my next moves will be. I heard Brian Moore seem to threaten litigation, so I just don't know what's next. And I'm not trying to be unclear. It's possible that I will come to you with an A&R lot on 65. That's possible. I don't know, but I need to see what Brian's up to, obviously.
But fair enough, and I don't mean to put you on the spot. I guess my one request is it has not been uncommon for us to get some of the material submitted relatively close to the meeting, and so particularly if we're getting something more substantial, the more notice you can give the board, the easier it'll be to answer some of the questions you'll likely have.
Yes.
And so the degree to which that's feasible with the work that you and Deshang and Jim and Brian and the kind of various different streams can do that, it certainly is helpful to try to get the answers for you.
Yeah, certainly some transparency from Brian about what's going on with lawsuits and with appeals would be great. I've not received anything. He said something about my receiving a green card. I've not received anything. So I just don't know what's going on.
Fair enough. Are we okay then for the rest of the board kind of moving on to the December 15th agenda items?
Yeah, can I just
And
ask?
we need to do minutes for approval.
Oops.
Oh, go ahead, Lisa. You
Just
wanna
one quick question. Were I think I recollect, so for just a proposal, just so I'm clear on the potential proposed future project on 65, was it 5 homes on approximately 1 acre lots that also would necessitate construction of a new roadway or new access way? I just want to make sure I was understanding that correctly.
Sorry, Lisa, could you clarify your question? I didn't quite understand it.
Yeah,
You were asking me the question.
Yeah, well, or yeah, you or Daryl or Marianne, I just wanted to get some clarification on the rest of the project, not 53, but was the proposal for constructing 5 5-bedroom homes on approximately 1 acre lots with a new access road? Is that
So the additional thoughts or possible plans, and obviously the open space subdivision is a very complicated permitting process with the planning board, and who knows when that's going to happen and how it's going to happen and what will ultimately be the result. The open space subdivision concept will be on approximately, I think, 10 or 11 acres, and it will be 5 homes as it stands today. There are currently thought to be 4 A&R lots. 1 we've discussed at length tonight, and 3 potential additional A&R lots, which are conventional by right proposals. Does that answer? And the access to the additional homes beyond the one we've discussed tonight and the existing home would be on a driveway that's very close to the existing driveway, on the driveway on 65.
Okay. Well,
all of these plans are, available Ellen has all of them, and I'm sure would be happy to circulate them to you.
Yeah,
In fact,
no,
I think they were in your packet tonight, as I recall.
Yeah, the only reason I'm bringing that up is just because I heard you reference Green Lane, which was 5 homes that were each 4 bedrooms on an existing, roadway that were all 2 or more acres for each individual lot. So I just wanted to just point out that there are some differences between the types of construction and proposals that.
Sure, but the point I was making is that the roll-up of those homes well exceeded the 2,000 gallons per day that kicks you into an EHIR.
Right. I understand. I understood your point. I just was, sort of comparing and contrasting
Fair
some
enough.
of the conditions and the density, thereof.
Yeah, I mean, understand that this is the one thing that I think a lot of folks have missed in the community is that when it's all said and done, if and when I'm allowed to permit the homes that I have talked about conceptually, you're talking about a total of 10 homes on 17 acres of land in a 1 acre zone. It's not a and in fact, under the open space bylaw, I could potentially build 7 homes in the open space. That's what the numbers are. I'm choosing 5 because I think 5 fits better on the property and will be a nicer project. And so the density that we're talking about here is well below the density of the existing neighborhood. And it's why it surprised me that people have been so upset about this.
Bob, can I just ask a clarifying question just to make sure I'm looking at the right thing?
Yes, please.
So what we've got in our SERP file is a pre-application conference, Sherborn Planning Board number 65. Is that the document you're referencing? And is that
That's
the,
correct. Yes.
that's the one?
Yes, and that as of October 28th was my thinking for what might be able to happen. I mean, one of the reasons that I brought all of this forward, I had talked to the Moores back in February, frankly, about more density than this. And one of the reasons I brought all of this forward was because people kept saying, you're not telling me what's going on, you're not telling. And so I said, okay, this is what I'm thinking. This is what's going on. But, there's a regulatory process that is very strict. I can't, as I said earlier tonight, I can't go through a process that you all would like to exist. I have to go through a process that does exist, and that's what I'm attempting to do with as much patience as I can muster.
So I just want to be clear. I think a detailed discussion of sort of what's happening at 65 is not consistent with our posted agenda. And so I think, Lisa, you were asking a kind of clarifying question, but I don't think it's appropriate for us to engage in a larger discussion of this since it's not posted on the agenda.
Yeah, no, I
enough,
agree.
enough.
I just wanted to put some of the comparisons that were listed in a little bit of perspective, but that's all.
Fair enough. Brian, I think you're welcome to comment, though I think it has to be limited in the scope because, again, the 65 piece is not a sort of posted agenda item, so we can't really discuss it in detail.
Well, I'm sorry, I just heard the claim that there's, a roadway on 65. Right now, there's no paved roadway on that parcel. There's a gravel cart path. That's all there is. And when it comes to speaking to the density of this proposed project, I'm sorry, I disagree with Mr. Murchison's claims. It is actually not in the spirit or anywhere near the spirit of what the existing neighborhood's at. And when it comes to the regulatory process, I wish that the entire project would be subjugated to the regulatory process that's set forth in state law under the Wetlands Protection Act and under Title V for a project of this magnitude. Thank you for hearing me.
Thanks, Brian. Rebecca, I see your hand up as well.
You're on mute, Rebecca.
Sorry,
You're on mute.
sorry. Yeah, got it. Sorry about that. Thank you. I also agree, and these are the reasons that we need to take these concerns seriously because there has been a precedent set in another town, which is one of the few towns in Massachusetts that has private water supplies, lack of DEP and statutory protection. When there's a potential to contaminate the drinking water of neighbors, we have to have a thorough review. And in the case of the example which keeps getting raised, in spite of the less dense proposed project, or I should say the less density of the built project, we have a neighbor with unpotable water 3 years today after the case was built. And this is something that is the reason that the Board of Health is trying to pay attention to these things, but I also think we need to pay attention here because there are potential risks that we are underestimating. We are relying on our regulations, which are well intended, but unfortunately, we're learning every minute of flaws in the procedure that are endangering potentially our natural resources more than just one or two people. We have a very high groundwater, and unfortunately, it doesn't drain, and there's a potential for contamination of aquifers. We have to think carefully and be responsible. I'm sorry.
So,
Okay.
so then we really can't discuss this. Like, this is not an agenda item.
Yeah.
I'm wildly enthusiastic about saying, let's make this an agenda item on the 15th because it's clearly an issue that's very important. And I would absolutely echo that. I just think we need to make sure it's under a posted agenda. And I think particularly if we can get some guidance from town council and get resolution there, it'll certainly be a richer discussion in terms of informing things.
But as you point out, Matt, now we have some agenda items for the 15th.
Perfect.
How we'd like to capture them and define them needs to be finalized, but.
Perfect. So I would propose one agenda item is to discuss the applicability of the EHIR requirement in that section of the regulations, and sort of any received guidance from council in that regard, as well as general discussion. And that may be
Yes,
in advance of when Mr.
I agree.
Murchison submits a plan, and so I think it may be a sort of conceptual framework of how we're thinking about it. If we have a specific plan to which we can apply it, great. Again, I think if we're going to go that road, having some time ahead of time to be able to review it would certainly be helpful. I would also like to propose a follow-up from the meetings of the regional school committee. There's two of them, I think on the 7th. And so just providing a follow-up to this group for the content of what they described, as well as the standing agenda item for COVID-19 data review.
Good, sounds appropriate.
And there is one variance hearing scheduled,
What time's the variance hearing?
7:30.
I guess recognizing that this will likely be a relatively long, I guess, Ellen, do you have a sense of what would be the earliest point after the 7:30 that it might be reasonable to schedule this as a topic so that folks who are most interested in this can plan to join at a specific time? Do you think we could do 7:45, or it would be better to do 8?
I'd suggest 7, give it 20 minutes. This is 7 Course Brook,
Okay.
and there may be some abutters at the meeting.
Okay. So let's say that we set this as an agenda item for 7:50 on the December 15th meeting, just so folks.
Which one? The regional school?
No, I think the EHIR discussion for the
okay.
parcel. I think the school committee will mostly be a report out of kind of what they landed on and decided in a summary of that discussion. So I think that we can do sort of ad hoc wherever it comes up.
Okay, discussion of applicability of EHIR requirement will be at 7:50.
Yep.
Okay.
And I don't think we need a specific time for the school discussion. I think that could be kind of where we fit it. So I think we'll just report out. Kind of
I think
just
we'll be looking at the budget again.
Yep, the budget, and then Ellen, I know that I owe you discussion on the public health nurse, and so let's include that as a topic as well.
Should that go under the budget as a subheading or separate?
I think so. I think budget subheading.
Okay.
I think that does it for the stuff that came to mind for me. I don't know what others have on their mind.
So Ellen, I can't recall, did they anticipate ARPA funds being included in the budget? Things that we expect to be funded by ARPA?
No, I don't think, I don't believe so. That I didn't read that anywhere.
Okay. So maybe that's the budget, and then the public health nurse might be two separate discussions.
Okay, let's put it as two separate discussions. Just
yeah, we could merge it if appropriate.
So the other thing to bring up was that we had planned to bump the permitting procedure document to next time. I think because neither Matt nor I have worked on it, I don't know that I will have time to work on it before the 15th. I don't know what your opinion on that is, Matt.
I feel like the same is going to be true for me, and the other stuff's more time sensitive since it relates both to the budget and kind of the outstanding questions with council. So let's roll that one over to the next meeting thereafter, and we can just check in on it.
I think that'd be better.
Yeah. So that does it for me. If other folks don't, we can add if new topics come in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then we still have the minutes for approval for
I think
November 10th and November 17th.
So I had some minor edits that I sent to Ellen. I didn't have anything that I thought was a substantive difference.
And I did the same already.
Yeah, I also communicated with Ellen. I don't recall that I made any changes if they were minor.
I sent one edit to Ellen by email.
Perfect. So do I have a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
So moved.
So moved. Second. And Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye.
All right.
If we just, I know we jumped around a little bit. I think we hit all the permits. We hit the VNA, we hit the budget. I think we hit all the chair's business.
And we had 74, which was the one added item.
Yep. Perfect. All right, guys.
All right, so do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
With unparalleled enthusiasm. So moved.
Seconded.
Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Have a good night, guys.
Night.
Good night.
Good night,
Thank
everyone.
you all.